inviting me here to your meeting in Australia. So here in Sweden, it's morning, so we just woke up. So I will talk about a little bit about my research that I have been doing for a few years concerning infrasound and other types of sound also a little bit. So I'm a professor at Uppsala University, and we have developed this software that is quite accurate to simulate all types of sound, how the sound is propagating to the surroundings. And in order to validate the code that we derived, we went out to do some measurements, and we started with wind turbines. So this picture is actually from one of the measurements we did in Sweden. So I will just briefly mention that if you want to simulate how sound propagates, it's very important that you incorporate all the necessary physics in your software. And in particular, the atmosphere is very important for sound propagation. And I will show you some examples later. So there is some physics in this. I will not go into it so much. But you have something called diffraction and refraction. And that is very important for low frequency sound, because diffraction is how sound waves bend around corners and things like that. And refraction is how sound is bending down in the atmosphere, depending on what the atmosphere is. So the atmosphere has really huge effect. And I will show you some examples later in this presentation. So we have derived a software that incorporates all of the physics that is necessary, and we call that SoundSim 360. The brain behind the software is my former PhD student, Gustav Eriksson. So we work together, and he's really one of the most clever students I ever met. So he has been the main architect of this software together with me. All right. So this is just, I like to show this simulation. This is Uppsala University, Ångström Laboratory. I sit in this blue building. This is just to show what this software can do. So every year the students have rock concerts outside this building in August. And this is just a simulation of that rock concert. This is not infrasound. This is a low frequency sound, 50 hertz. So that is typically what you hear from a subwoofer. But this sound can propagate many kilometers, and you can hear that. This is just to illustrate the effect of diffraction, that sound waves bend around corners. It's also transmitted into the building. So this is just a big simulation. And then we compared it to what the acoustics consultants usually use in Sweden, at least. There's a software called SoundPlan that they use for almost all types of sound emissions. And the model that they use is called Nord 2000. So in Sweden, they use this for all types of road traffic noise and wind turbine noise. So this is just a comparison against that software, and that software is based on ray tracing methods. So it can't handle diffractions. It can be very wrong results from that. So here it's more than 30 decibel behind the corners, if you look to the left. So this is indoor simulation with the software. This is actually from inside the building where we put the speaker in one of the rooms. Just to illustrate that to the right you have 50 hertz and to the left it's 200 hertz. So the lower you go in frequency, the more it's gonna, spread, because it transmits through walls and you also have diffraction. So low frequency sound is not, it can reach quite far. This is inside the building. This is from where I live in Uppsala. This is traffic noise. We also have problems with traffic noise. And then we talk about low frequency noise. So this is just a simulation we did. Here, the red here is from trucks that go on this road. And then there's a noise barrier, and then all the black here is buildings where people live. So there are many families living here, and this just illustrates the importance of the atmosphere. These are 2 different days in January, and you see the wind direction, and it really affects how much sound will reach you where you live. So the atmosphere is really important. So you have to take the atmosphere into consideration. And this is just a nice simulation of what it looks like. So here you see the noise barrier, you see all the buildings, and this is in 30 hertz. So it will refract around this noise barrier. It's also gonna transmit through the noise barrier. So this noise barrier is not really helping much for low frequency sound, as you can see. So this is a quite accurate simulation. We have submitted this to Applied Acoustics journal. So this is research work. So this is the place where I live in Sweden. And of course, people are complaining. The people who live closest to this road are complaining actually a lot, because this noise barrier is not really helping so much. Anyway, so when you talk about low frequency noise, and that is all frequencies below 200 hertz, you have something called amplitude modulation, and that is this swishing sound. I will play some of these sounds soon. So that is a low frequency sound that can reach more than 10 kilometers. And that's the sound you can hear. This is not the infrasound. And what we know from psychoacoustics is that this amplitude modulated type of sound is more annoying than if you have just steady sound. And we also know that if you have a sound with more low frequency content in it, it's more annoying. So that is quite well-known work or research. And one thing that the industry likes to say is that larger wind turbines don't emit more sound. Well, this is a Chinese study from 2024. They actually measured low frequency sound only between 20 hertz and 200 hertz, and compared a 4.5 megawatt turbine with the 1.5 megawatt turbine. And what they could see is that, yes, the larger one emits 17 decibel more low frequency sound than the smaller. So no, larger wind turbines emit much more low frequency sound. And well, this is something I did a long time ago with one of my PhD students. We compared these softwares that the industry likes to use. So to the right, we have compared 3 of these ray tracing methods, and this Nord 4000 model is a ray tracing method. And here you can see the black lines here are topography. And what this research showed is that these ray tracing methods can be really unreliable if you have some topography, and this is over 2 kilometers. So they are not really accurate for low frequency sound on if you have some topography and large distances. And this is a colleague of mine, Conny Larsson, who did measurements on wind turbines for over a year. And he compared this Nord 2000 model and saw that, yes, it doesn't fit the measurements. So it's roughly 7 decibel too low values. And they also saw that you get this amplitude modulation 33% of the time. So quite often you have this swishing sound, and typically in the evenings and in the winters. So this is from other measurement by Thomas Lage and Bertil Persson. I know Thomas Lage, he was really knowledgeable in noise measurements. Fortunately, he died a few years ago, but I talked to him a lot. And this is a person who complained. So he lives roughly 600 meters from these 4 wind turbines, and they are quite small. They are only 2 megawatts. And they went there to measure the sound for 2 weeks. So here's the background measurement they did away from the wind turbines, just to show what is the background level if you don't have wind turbines. And it's roughly 30 dBA. And this is what they saw when they did this long time measurements. So if you follow the green, it looks like a sinus wave. That is the dBA measurement over a few days. And you see that the levels vary quite significantly. So it goes from 40 dBA up to almost 60. The legal limit in Sweden is 40 dBA. So here it's over 40 almost all of the time, and quite almost up to 60 dBA. So yes, they're clearly violating the regulations here. So this is only the audible sound. It's not infrasound. Of course, nothing happened with this. They didn't accept this recording. I don't know why. But this was published at the conference a few years ago. And this is from another measurement that we did in Sötterfällan. So this wind farm is roughly 7 years old. So it consists of 10 Vestas, 3.6 megawatt turbines. The tip height is 190 meters. And at the locations here, A, B, C, D, we have people living. And at the locations A and B, we recorded the sound, the audible sound. This day, it was roughly 60 dBA. This was in January 6 last year. This is from the industry using Nord 2000 model. And they show that the level should be 38 dBA at these 2 locations. So this is roughly between 700 to 900 meters away from the closest wind turbine. So the legal limit is 40 dBA. So here they were allowed to build. So this is a recording from this evening at one of the places. So these people have horses. Hopefully you can hear the sound. I don't know if you have the speakers on there, but this is this audible sound. It's close to 60 dBA. And this is on the other location where a family lives. And here you also see this flickering light from the turbines. So it's both lights and sound that are quite annoying, I would say. So But let's get to infrasound then, the sound that you can't hear. So I've been doing research for a long time on infrasound, mostly volcanoes. So we have derived software that can, you build models for volcanoes, for example, and then by listening to infrasound from volcanoes, you can try to figure out when they're going to explode. So that is one thing where infrasound is very useful. Another thing is to keep track of nuclear explosions in the world, because they emit lots of infrasound. So if you listen for infrasound, you will know if the North Koreans are blowing something or the Russians. So because you can record it. So it's propagating all over the world. You also get the infrasound from high-speed trains and wind turbines. And you have this CTBTO infrasound network. It consists of 60 stations around the world. So they are listening for infrasound to detect nuclear explosions mostly. So they use very sophisticated infrasound equipment that is highly sensitive. So we have visited one of these places in Norway twice to calibrate our equipment to compare with there. We recently also bought similar equipment that they use. So we are right now testing it. So we will go out to do more measurements with that. So I will have to get back to that. Anyway, so for those who don't know what infrasound is, I will give you an analogy to electromagnetic waves. So electromagnetic waves, it can be everything from radio waves down to gamma rays. And the only difference is the frequency. So if you have very long wavelengths, you have radio waves. And if you have very short wavelengths, you have X-rays and gamma rays. And then when you get the acoustics, you have something similar. You have ultrasound, that is very high frequency waves. And then you have the audible frequencies. It's roughly between 20 and 20,000 hertz, roughly. And then you have infrasound. Those are all the frequencies below 20 hertz. So everything below 20 hertz is infrasound. And then you have low frequency sound that is roughly between 20 and 200 hertz. So this is a comparison. If you take infrasound outside the building, or if you take 100 hertz outside the building, how much is the building shielding against this sound? So this is just a comparison. So this is the building where we sit in Uppsala University. So here we plot the transmission loss. It shows how much sound is kept out, kind of. So to the right, you see at 1 hertz, the building is not really there. It doesn't shield anything. It's like it wasn't even there. If you look at 100 hertz to the left, you see that some of the sound is actually shielded out, but some is actually going in. So the higher you go in frequency, the more it's going to be, left out. So infrasound at 1 hertz just goes through the building. It's not stopped by the building. It's also going to propagate very far in the atmosphere because it's not absorbed by the atmosphere. Okay, here's some infrasound that can generate. You have from battery parks, airplanes, fans and ventilations, and wind turbines. And then you naturally have it from volcanoes, tornadoes, ocean waves, all types of weather generate infrasound. So you have that naturally also. And some animals communicate with infrasound, like blue whales and elephants. But I guess you will hear more about that later in this meeting, but I want to make clear that the infrasound that is generated by wind turbines doesn't look like natural infrasound. It's a very pulsating sound. So every time the blade passes the tower, you get like an implosion. So this is what it looks like. Here you see pressure as a function of time. So here, each time the blade passes the tower, you get like an implosion. It looks like an explosion. This is not what the infrasound from the ocean look like at all. So it's a very pulsating sound. So I would like to make an analogy. If you take a dripping faucet, that is quite annoying sound because it's dripping. It's like pulsating. And if you take just a steady sound, it's not at all as annoying as when you have this pulsating sound. So you have to take that into consideration when you talk about annoyance. It's not always about the level, it's really about the character of the sound. The first one who did really careful measurements of this, one of the first at least, was Neil Kelly and his group. And they wrote a couple of papers in the 80s. I talked to him. They are really good studies, but they measure this pulsating infrasound from the wind turbines. So those studies are really, really good studies. So I'm no expert in health. I guess you will hear more about that later, but I still find a few of these articles that I found through experts interesting. The first one here is from blood pressure. A group in Sweden actually they expose people to infrasound at quite high levels, up to 120 decibel, but already at 95 decibel, they see a change in the blood pressure. And then Alex Salt did interesting work in 2010 and showing that the ears have two different systems. One of the systems are actually sensitive to infrasound, and that has nothing to do with hearing. So that's more connected to the limbic system in the brain. And then there were some fMRI studies by Forlim and Koch and Kuhn. This paper from 2024, where they actually expose people to inaudible infrasound, and they see that the brain is affected, the hearing is not affected. So I find that very interesting. So you don't have to hear infrasound for the brain to register it. So the hearing is not really involved here. And then there were this recent study where they exposed people to inaudible infrasound and saw that it affected the cortisol. That is a quite new study. We also know that 20 to 30% have a high sensitive nervous system. So those are most likely the persons who will first, get affected by this infrasound. And then some people who had done measurements actually got sick while recording it. So this is one of these papers. And so that was quite interesting because they also published a few papers on this. And again, Neil Kelly was the first who documented this for wind turbines 45 years ago. All right. So, yeah, these are things I would like the authorities to pick up. I have read many studies, and so far I have not seen any really good study that show that infrasound is harmless or that infrasound is dangerous or anything. I just noticed that there's a knowledge gap here, and we need to, really fill that knowledge gap. So what I suggest is to do a real study. The problem with wind turbine noise is that you can't really replicate that type of sound in a lab. I think you have to do a real field study because labs are not able to replicate this pulsating infrasound. And so you really need to do a proper study where you actually involve experts also in neuro, I can't really pronounce it, but people who are experts in the brain and migraines and things like that. And it has to be long-term exposure effects that you investigate, and it has to involve lots of people. I'm not going to do this study, but I can help out with what the level should be and things like that, and help out with simulations and measurements. So these are the group that has been working on this. So, and this is the equipment we have been using. It's called Lidström. So we have had it calibrated at CDBTO. And then we have Leif, who has worked 35 years with infrasound at the Swedish Defense Research Agency. And then you have Jose Chilo, who did a PhD on infrasound measurements. And then we have Gustav and me. And this is from one of the measurements in Sweden. So here you see those turbines are 200 meters tall and 4.2 megawatts. This from one of the recordings in the winter. So here we did the recording where we actually capture when they turn the wind turbines off. So it goes from on to off in the same recording, just to show that, and what you see below is just the infrasound levels. So the blue here is with the turbines on, and the red is when you turn them off. The interesting here is that the infrasound go down by 20 to 30 decibel when you turn them off. So it also shows that you have some infrasound in the forest, even without the turbines, but it's much lower. So the high levels of infrasound clearly comes from the wind turbines, not from the wind or something else. And this is from the measurements. We had 2 measurement stations here. And then we have a resident who lives close by that we have talked to a lot. He's not feeling very well. We will do more careful measurements inside his home later on, once the new equipment is working. So at that day, he roughly had 95 decibel where he lived. And here the sound power level was approximately 154 that day. This is just, it's good to mention this different weights that you use when you have dBA, dBg, dBc, and just dB. Sometimes they call it dBz. So it's just different ways of summing all the frequencies up. So if you use dBA, that is used by the industry, at 1 hertz, you remove 150 decibel. So if say that you have a sound that is 39 dBA, like your refrigerator or something, and then you add 150 decibel at 1 hertz to that, it's still going to be 39 dBA. So this dBA measure is not really useful when it comes to sources where almost all the energy is below 2 hertz. And that is what you have with the wind turbine. Most of the energy is below 2 hertz. So you shouldn't really use dBA for that. You should just use dB. And this is from one of the measurements. And here you see the measured value and the calculated value at these recording stations. And you see that, the deviation is 2 decibel approximately. This is from another day where we also had 2 measurement stations, and here the deviation is less than 1 decibel. So this just shows that the software, give almost the same values as the measurements. So it's just a validation of that. And these are 2 different atmospheres. I just want to illustrate that the atmosphere can be very different. This is one day in March. This is what the atmosphere looks like in the night to the left and in the day to the right. And what is really interesting is this boundary layer. Here I point to the wind speed, the wind magnitude. What's happening in the night is that the boundary layer, it's where the wind at the ground, the wind speed is roughly 0, and then it goes up to some value at some certain height, and that is the boundary layer. But it gets compressed in the night, and that's when you get this swishing sound. When the blades pass this boundary layer, you get this amplitude modulated sound. And here, just to illustrate what happens to different frequencies, 1 hertz, 5 hertz, 50 hertz, and 500 hertz. So it's damped by the atmosphere and the ground. So if you take a day atmosphere, it's going to be damped much faster. If you take a night atmosphere when it's blowing more, this infrasound will propagate much further. It's just a simulation that shows what's going to happen. So you have some damping from the ground and from the atmosphere. But for infrasound, you have very little damping. So that is unique with the infrasound. So this is from one of the places where we've been measuring also. It's called Åseda, where you have roughly, you have lots of wind turbines here. And at location A, I have a person who lives, Kenneth. And this just to illustrate what you will see if you have a day atmosphere and the wind is 8 meters a second. And to the right, I have the same with the night atmosphere. You see that the infrasound propagates much further. If you only have 1 meter per second wind, it propagates, you see, it doesn't propagate as far. So the atmosphere has, very big effect. This is from a place in Sweden we recently visited. This is a wind farm that they plan to build. There are actually 3 wind turbines farms. So this is the infrasound from that. And to the left, I show a day atmosphere with 4 meters a second southwest wind. So the wind is coming from the left. And here you see that the infrasound is propagated much further to the right due to the wind. And to the right, I have this night atmosphere where we have 8 meters a second in all directions. So that's kind of the worst case scenario. And then the infrasound will propagate much further. So what type of atmosphere you have will really affect how the level of infrasound that you will perceive. So this is from another measurement in Sweden where some larger wind turbines, they are 6.6 megawatt. At this day, we recorded 106 decibel at this person's house, Kenneth. Kjell-Åke, sorry, his name is Kjell-Åke. So this is where he lives. We've been there twice. This is one of the measurements. This is a few months later. So you see that the sound level varies. It depends on the weather quite a lot. So this is just a nice simulation of that. So this is this Lervik wind farm with 6.6 megawatt turbines. So they are quite big. The blades are 85 meters. So yeah, the infrasound reaches very far because it's not really damped by the atmosphere or the ground. It's also not damped by the walls of your house. And this is from Crookwell. So we did a careful simulation for you. This is, I think, Crookwell 2 and 3. So there are plenty of these wind turbines, and all this blue here is where people live, where you live, some of you. So this is the DBA simulation, and to the right I have a list of all the nearby residents and what the levels are. So it varies a little bit. And this is the infrasound simulation, where we take this night atmosphere with 8 meters a second. So this is like the worst case scenario. It's not going to be like this every day. So this is the worst it can be based on the knowledge that we have today. So, and of course it will be lower other days, depending on the wind and the atmosphere. But this is the worst case scenario that we produced. So this is what I would like to happen. I would like that you take the physics into consideration when you predict the noise. When you do this noise emission maps, you should really use software that takes the atmosphere and everything into consideration, so it's kind of accurate. And then you should also, look at all the frequencies, not just this audible sound. You should look at the low frequency sound and the infrasound. And you should also make independent measurements. So if you want to verify that you kind of obeying the regulations, you should have independent experts. Those should not be hired by the wind industry. And you should also do these simulations without, telling that you're doing them. Because this is like a doping control. It should not be announced. You should just go out and check. And it's important. It should be done by independent experts. And make sure that you use equipment that is properly calibrated so you can also measure the infrasound, not only the audible sound. And then I suggest that you should include low frequency sound and infrasound in the regulation. And what that regulation should be depends on what the health studies will show you. So I don't know what that will be, but I just know that you need to investigate this so you would know what the levels. I mean, how can you make sure that you have a safe distance from the wind turbine? And that will require some more studies, if you ask me. All right. So that was everything I had to share. So if there are some questions, I will stay on and listen also to what the others say. And of course, I will answer any questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Can you hear me, Ken?
Yes.
Good. So, can we give the professor a round of applause for you? If you stop sharing your screen and if you can turn on your live camera, and there's a few people that do have questions for you.
Yeah, sure.
And I'll get them to come up. First of all, though, before we get the first person, and I know Steve wanted to ask something of you, really appreciate that report that you did for us. The problem that we see is that was based on Crookwell 2 and 3. And in that map, even as with the decibel levels around all the properties, it was measuring 109.4 up to 115 decibels of infrasound. itself. But then on the other side, included in that map with areas that were affected would be Rye Park, Taralga, and the Gullen Range, which means that we're sort of encircled where they'd be almost like they're bouncing off each other. If you understand what I'm, because they're all in close proximity.
You mean that you have more wind farms?
Yes.
Was that your?
All in this?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's the thing with infrasound is because it reaches quite far, as you can see, depending on the atmosphere. So you have to include, neighboring wind farms when you look at this. It's not enough to look at the isolated wind farm because you will have contribution from neighboring wind farms depending on how far away they are. So, and it can be more and less depending on the wind direction, of course, and the weather. So it will vary, but it's important to take, all the wind farms into consideration when you do this infrasound assessment. But the problem is that the authorities don't recognize the infrasound as a problem. So, yeah.
We're hoping to change that, though.
Yeah, hopefully they will, investigate that. I don't think people will feel calm just because someone say it's safe. If you don't have proof of that, then it's not gonna, calm people down. That's my standpoint.
Steve, has anyone got a question that? Oh, can you come up here? That we'll probably because this mic can pick it up there. No, because of just pop in front so that he can see in front of that little camera. You might have to go back a little bit.
Hi there.
Hello.
How are you? My name's Nicole. I'm actually up from Shooters Hill. I was really interested in the atmospheric because we're 1,360 meters above sea level. What are you?
900.
900.
Yeah.
So if we're higher, does that mean that the infrasound is going to travel further because the air is a bit thinner?
Well, I think the most important, the topography has certain effects. So if it's quite hilly and things like that, it also depends on the location of all the wind turbines because they can interfere with each other. But I'm not sure. I mean, we always take the atmosphere into consideration when we simulate, but I would say that you have what's most important is the temperature and humidity when it comes to absorption. And then it's really important how the temperature and the wind changes with height. Sometimes you have a certain type of atmosphere that makes the sound bend down a lot. So you get like a wave guide. So it bounces. So when it comes to infrasound, since it's not really damped, it can bounce quite far. So it's not going up in the atmosphere and just leaves. It can also bounce at certain levels at the atmosphere. So it can actually be higher further away because it bounces down. So you can have places where, okay, here is not so high. Then you move further away and it's much higher because it's bouncing down there at these locations. And that depends on the atmosphere. So it's hard to say when it's going to be worst. It's going to be from day to day, depending on the wind direction is really important. So if the wind is blowing in your direction, it will be much higher. So the wind is, I would say, the most important factor, but also how the temperature changes with height. So it can have effect. I can't really say how much it will change depending on the height, but 900 meters is not really extreme. If you would go to a few thousand meters, yeah, and the atmospheric physics changes a little bit, and probably it will just reach further.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, just go over to you.
Good morning. My
Good
name,
morning.
my name's Tina Gazinski. I'm actually from an area in Tumut called the Nobondo Wind Farm. What we're expecting in our area is that they are going to be planning 164 300-metre high wind turbines in the middle of a pine forest. So allowing
Okay.
for the infrastructure that you've been talking about, our nearest neighbours to that development proposal is about 5 kilometres. What would be an approximate evaluation from your knowledge in that particular scenario?
Well, depend if the wind is blowing in their direction, the levels from that will most likely be very high. We haven't really measured on those type of turbines because they haven't. In Sweden at the moment, the highest are, I think, 200 meters. They are now planning also 250 and 300-meter high turbines. And also the fact that you have a lot of them, so they will interfere with each other. So yeah, at 5 kilometers, the levels can be really, really high if the wind is blowing in that direction. That's my assessment. Of course, you need to look at it more carefully in detail to say, but yeah, that's a huge wind farm for sure.
Thank you very much for your assistance.
Yeah, thank you.
Steve?
Hi, Professor Madison.
Hello. Hello.
My name's Stephen, and my question is preempted this one. What I've noticed is across several Australian projects, for example, Stromlo's Limerick wind farm at 1.9 kilometres and Oberon at 2 kilometres, their neighbouring agreement asks residents to accept noise levels up to 10 dBA above the 35 dBA government limit. Internationally, groups like Hayes, Mackenzie, and the Danish Technical University have reported that turbine noise is often underpredicted by around 3 to 7 dBA. From your perspective, as a computational acoustic expert, does this suggest that 2 kilometres is inside the distance with compliance becomes difficult, and that a more realistic setback would be in the vicinity of 2.5 to 3.5 kilometre range?
Well, you have to, I mean, in order to say something for sure, you have to really simulate it to check, but it depends on what the input values are and how many turbines and where they're located and things like that. But if their assessment, typically what we see if the industry produce a DBA plot, that is usually when we look at it, we usually get higher values than them with the same input. So it can be perhaps 5 dBA higher based on the input data. But then you have to question yourself, is the input data reliable? The input data comes from the industry. And as I showed you here, when you reach 60 dBA instead of 38, that is because the turbines emit much more noise. So how much the wind turbines emit is not the constant. And that is assumed in all of these assessments. The wind turbine source in itself depends on the weather. So when you get this amplitude modulated sound in the evenings, the levels are also higher at the source. And then you have the propagation effect. So there's two things: how much sound is emitted and how is it propagated. So those are two different things that you have to combine.
Yeah.
So if you go out and measure, I mean, why do we measure 60 dBA when the industry says it's going to be 38?
Exactly. That's sorry to interrupt, but that's roughly my question. And excuse the pun, but I'm just a layman at this sort of stuff. And I just see a common denominator that they predict a volume and expect a neighbour to sign an agreement to have one within, say, 2 kilometres, and they're already predicting that they're going to be 10 dBA over the guideline.
Yeah.
And as from what I understand, is the modelling is exactly what you've been talking about today. It's just a standard modelling, and they're not. And as you say, you need to get independent advice, because at the end of the day, they can say they're neutral, but they are being paid by someone to do a job.
All these acoustic consultants, they of course work for the industry, and that makes it a little problematic. I think at least when you're going to do a follow-up, and after they have built this, you can verify it.
Yeah.
And that should not be done by the same group of people who did the first assessment.
Correct.
And that is in Sweden, that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
And of course, they never find any problem. They find, this simulations is as we expected, they can say, because they're doing it themselves.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, and do appreciate you talking tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. We've got another question, Ken, coming.
Yeah, I will stay as long as anyone will have questions.
I know it's morning over there.
Good morning, Rob.
It's okay.
Rob Parker.
Morning.
And I'm just after a little bit of explanation for the people generally, because there's a very frightening variation you just gave in that last answer. You said, okay, the modelling can project 38 dB, but in reality there is 60. Could you please explain to the audience what that means? Because it's not a linear difference. It's 60 is not roughly double 35. Could you please explain to the layman what dB means in terms of intensity?
Yeah, if you talk about the energy,
yes,
the acoustic energy, then 3 dBA difference is doubling. 6 dBA means 4 times higher. 10 dBA means 10 times higher energy. So here I'm talking about something that is almost like 20 dBA above. So that is, it's very much above. So 3 dBA is a doubling. So if you go from 38 to 41, it's a doubling of the energy. So dBA is a little bit tricky. It's not like a linear thing. It's logarithmic. If you get the deviation by 20 dBA, it's very, very high deviation.
We're nearly coming to the end of your time, Professor Matson, but I'm trialling an app that you and your team are developing at the moment, and was selected as one of the 5 areas around the world that this is being trialled. Could you just explain to everybody what the virtual idea of this app and how it will actually help communities?
You mean this app that we derived, that you tested?
Yeah.
Yeah, we wanted to derive a tool, an application on your mobile phone that all people could use. So it's quite simple to use. You can place your wind turbines wherever you want and what the type of wind turbines, and then generate a noise map from that. So what we did is we took our software and simulated the entire globe for a few months. And then we derived an AI model that trained on this for several months. So it's going to replicate the real software. And that we put into a mobile application. And that will, I think within a month, it will be available for everyone. So that means that everyone can test. If someone proposes we're going to build a wind farm here, you can test. If you have the coordinates to the wind turbines, you can simulate it and make sure what the levels will be where you live and your neighbors live. But in the first version, we only focus on dBA because that's where you have the legal limits at the moment. So it will only be for dBA in this first version, at least.
Is there any other questions? Yeah. We've got one more.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Professor, my name's Egan. I live in an area where there's a large wind farm proposed. And I'll be brief in the question. The proposed turbines are Vestas 7.2 megawatts. The turbines you're tested in your presentation have been, I think, 2.2, 3.3, and 4.3, or thereabouts. Have you any experience? Have you any experience?
No,
any experience in the performance of the 7.2 megawatt turbines?
we did most of the measurements on 4.3 megawatt Vestas. And we also did measurements on Siemens 6.6 megawatt. And they are quite close to these 7.2 megawatt Vestas. They have a similar blade length. So I think this, and what we typically see is that the higher you build the turbines, or the bigger you make them in megawatt, the more low frequency sound you will get and more infrasound. But how much it will be for these really new bigger ones, we don't really know because no one has really measured on them. But we will try to do it with the new equipment for sure. But so the larger you build them, the more low frequency sound you will get. So it will not be less, at least. It will be most likely more. So, yeah.
Well, that answers the question. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Can we? I hope you're going to stay on, Professor, to enjoy the other presenters. But thank you again.
Thank you. I was staying and listening. So thank you.
I hope that you come out in spring as we've had those discussions.
Yeah. We'll see. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
No worries. Yeah, you can.
Can you mute me, because now it froze again, so you can just turn me off from distance, because now I can't. I hear you, but I can't do anything. Okay. I don't know if you can silence me.
Is everyone happy to go on to Mariana next, or do you want to have a quick break? Yep, quick break. Right.
Okay, so my academic qualifications are that I hold a bachelor's in physics from the State University of New York at Stony Brook. I hold a master's in biomedical engineering from Drexel University in Philadelphia, and I hold a PhD in environmental sciences from Nova University in Lisbon. That sounds like very if you think about it, this is the perfect array of academic qualifications to study physical phenomenon. So I could be studying electromagnetic radiation with the same physics, biomedical, and environmental. But I actually began in 1989 when I started translating. I became a technical translator within the Portuguese Air Force. And so I started working with in an Air Force base, aeronautical environment. They did rehab and maintenance for military aircraft. So I hooked up with the medical team that was investigating the health of these aeronautical workers. So I began translating their abstracts into English. I already had a technical background, obviously, or else I wouldn't be a technical translator. And I became extremely interested in this topic. I was, with a physics background, I knew a little bit about acoustics and waves, and this was fascinating to me um, to think about how an airborne pressure wave interacts with biological tissue. Now, yes, we all model humans as solids. We're not solids. We're very far away from being a solid, okay? We're viscoelastic, okay? So it's not even only elastic either. It's like a plasma, like a gel, more than a solid. So, so very early, I was thinking about how is it that airborne pressure wave can impact a viscoelastic material. How does that happen? I mean, what happens after, So it impacts what happens after. Um, at that time, as I said, I was working with a medical team. So it was a multidisciplinary medical team. We had neurologists, lung doctors, internal medicine, quite a team. In 92, we began studying animal models in the laboratory. And you have to understand, there's no wind turbines in 92, right? So we're looking at what happens to workers. And so then in '04 comes our first environmental case, which I'll talk about more in my presentation. And in '07 comes the wind turbines. And, and it's been wind turbines ever since. And we're all kind of tired of these wind turbines. We know they're not good for the health. They might be good for energy production. Might is, but and here we are. So this is briefly my path in this field.
Thank you. I think we're ready to kick off again. So hopefully get your screen share, Terry. Where do I? Terry. Screen share again.
Oh, I can do it now. Okay,
yep.
Hold on. Share.
Yep.
Right. Let me just do this. Can you all see?
Yeah.
Right. So here we go. I'm just going to jump ahead because I've been talking for a while, so I don't think I need any more introductions and all of this. As Professor Matheson correctly pointed out, there is a very close association with electromagnetic spectrum and acoustic spectrum. And usually the layperson is more familiar with the electromagnetic spectrum. And just with the electromagnetic spectrum, there is a small window where we can see. And the thing is that outside of that window, look at what we do to the electromagnetic spectrum. We segment it, right? Gamma rays, X-rays, ultraviolet, infrared. The UV is even further segmented into ultraviolet A, B, and C. That's how segmented we do the electromagnetic spectrum. Now look at the acoustic spectrum. Look how we segment that. It's just like three big chunks, right? Ultrasound, audible, and infrasound. There's no segmentation. it wreaks havoc on health studies because a 2 hertz can affect you in one way, a 5 hertz can affect you in a different way, and a 10 hertz in a different way. So if we're putting everything in the same bag, this is very, very difficult for health studies. Now, when we're studying waves, any type of waves, but okay, here acoustics, there are 2 parameters that are fundamental, which is the amplitude, how high does it go, how many dBs does it have, and the frequency. So noise or sound or airborne pressure waves, physically, it's a force. It acts as a force on your body. Were that not true, we wouldn't hear, right? Because what does sound do to the ear? It moves the hair cells. It's acting as a force on the structure, on the biological structure. So, whenever we think of noise, we should think about a pressure wave. It's a force that impacts your body. Now, this force is varying in time, it's varying in amplitude, and it's varying in frequency. Great, that's just what a scientist wants to hear, right? Something that's varying in all parameters possible. This is difficult to study. So, frequency. Now, frequency has to do with the distance between the peaks of the wave. So on the left-hand side of your screen, you see the higher frequency. See that distance between the peaks? It's smaller than the lower frequency where the distance is very high, very large. So because of this difference, among other things, when you have high frequency, it does not penetrate the ground, it does not penetrate structures. But when you have this low frequency with this large wavelength, the distance between the peaks is called the wavelength. When you have this, then it can penetrate into buildings and into the ground. So we hear in wavelengths that are small, in the order of centimeters. When we go down to 20 hertz, which is classically considered the limit of our hearing threshold, at 20 hertz, that wavelength is 17 meters. So one of the problems with acoustics is that rule of thumb is the barrier of the acoustic barrier has to be in the order of the wavelength. So, okay, triple glazed windows, that's great. That's going to stop every wave that has the wavelength in centimeters, which is what we hear. But 17 meters and at 1 hertz, it's 343 meters. So acoustic barriers of that thickness, it's not viable. And hence, one of the reasons why infrasound is so problematic and low frequency noise as well. So here's a little historical evolution for you. In 1903 in New York, they were already measuring the noise. In 1932, the equipment, as you see, got smaller. And in the 21st century, we have your common sound level meter. And on the last one, you have the equipment that we use currently, which is the SAM system. Most, if not all, but most of noise legislation is anchored, or most of the methodologies that are described on how to measure noise is anchored on an ISO standard. And this ISO standard comes from the 1930s when Harvey Fletcher was developing the telephone, right? So if you think about it, infrasound and telephone are irrelevant. We don't talk in infrasound, we don't communicate in infrasound. So what happened, and as you can expect, infrasound was taken off the chart. We don't need it. And so ISO is still anchored to these ancient methodologies, outdated in this today digital world. They're outdated. So as we shall see. Another problem studying acoustics and health and humans is that what we hear, it's not linear. So what we hear depends on a combination of amplitude and frequency, right? So we don't hear all frequencies at all amplitudes. We don't hear all amplitudes at all frequencies. So as you can see, this is this picture I'm showing you. You can see that as we go lower in the frequency, you need a higher amplitude to actually perceive it through the ear, right? So when you are going now back to the 1930s, your objective is to protect the hearing of people. We have in the 1930s the immense explosion of the industry. We have an immense explosion of transportation systems. We're talking about railways that go right in front of your house now in the big cities. So the hearing was becoming a problem. So it became necessary to enter into an environment and only measure what you hear. Okay, that's the historical reason of where we are, where we are. And what are the mantras? What is being told to you, right? They're being told, oh, well, infrasound is below the threshold of hearing, therefore it has no effect on health. It's below the threshold of concern. That was a recent one out of Canada, below the threshold of concern. The most common and prevalent and historically present is what you can't hear won't hurt you. That's the most prevalent thing that you're told, right? Oh, yes, all that infrasound, but then you can't hear it. It's below the audibility threshold, so it's not a problem. Let's see if that's true. So, the DBA. You've already talked about the DBA. What is this DBA thing that everybody measures noise in DBA? Shouldn't we find out what it is? So, again, the DBA came from the need to go into an acoustic environment and only measure what the human hears. Because that's what's bad for you. That's what causes hearing impairment. That's what we want to measure. So in the 1930s, a filter was developed. And you can think of the DBA as a filter that you put over the microphone so that you're only measuring through the microphone, you're only measuring what the human being would hear if they were in that environment. So I need to explain this blue curve to you guys because you have to understand the next time they give you wind turbine noise in DBAs, please laugh in their faces. Oh, please laugh in their face. Please say, oh, great, I'm not going to go deaf with the wind turbines because you won't. So let's go back to this blue curve and let's see what's there. As you can see, it goes to zero. It's almost a straight line on zero between the frequency range of 800 to 7,000 hertz. Remember, this is where we hear very well. The baby cries at 3,500 hertz. Professional deafness is established at 4,000 hertz. So when you're measuring with the DBA, that zero there means that what you're measuring and what is actually in the environment, that difference is zero. It's great. So between 800 and 7,000, if you're measuring with the DBA, the difference between what you're reading on the machine and what is actually there in the environment is zero. This is great because we want to protect the hearing, right? This is how it goes. This is where we are most sensitive. That is where we really have to get good readings, good measurements, right? Now, what happens when we use the DBA to measure infrasound? Okay, at 10 hertz, if you measure with the DBA at 10 hertz, what you read on your machine is 70 dBs lower than what is in the environment. Okay, so now we're the scientists, right? For us, for me, this is an error in measurement. I have a 70 dB error in measurement when I'm using the DBA at 10 hertz. So as you can understand, this is entirely, if you want to measure what's there, the DBA is not the way to go. The DBA measures the risk for your hearing impairment. That's what it was designed for, and it works very well. We don't have to throw away the DBA. I'm not saying that at all, but we have to recognize what it was designed for, to measure the risk of hearing impairment. So, what are the consequences of this? What you're looking at is how noise is normally presented. It's a 10-minute measurement, so a 10-minute average. And all these bars that you see, all this pink stuff, is not measured by the DBA. All you see, those red bars, that is what the DBA measures. Everything else is not measured at all. Each bar that you're seeing is called a third octave band. So what they've done is they've gone to the acoustic spectrum and they've divided it into thirds, right? So in this case, for each octave of the acoustic spectrum, we get 3 data points. That's what the third octave band analysis means. So as you can see, the DBA isn't really measuring a lot. It is if you're concerned about hearing impairment. It's not if you're interested in knowing acoustically what is in the environment. So let's see one of the first very serious consequences of this DBA. Here we have 2 environments, the same exact DBA, 28. But you go and take out the DBA and actually look and see what's in the environment. One has 47 dBs. dBs is just linear without any filters, raw if you want. And on the other one, you have 89. So these are 2 significantly different environments, acoustic environments, and yet the DBA does not differentiate between them. This is a horror show for the medical community. A horror show, because no longer can the DBA be considered a dose, right? The medical doctor will say, well, whatever happens in people in the one on the left has to happen to the people on the one on the right because it's the same 28 dBAs, right? Well, they're being misled. 28 dBAs does not mean, in 2 environments, does not mean equivalently acoustic environments. It just doesn't. So let's take this into the wind turbines. This is a study that was done in 2020. And so we placed our equipment inside the home of people that were complaining about wind turbines. Their noise, they couldn't sleep, not pretty. During the time the equipment was in the house, the people were asked to keep a diary so that eventually we could try to marry what people were feeling and when with what was in the acoustic environment so we could marry them. I have to say this. You cannot see what is happening on the computer screen of our equipment. So it's not like these residents could just sit in front of the computer screen and write down, oh, let's see oh, yes, now we feel bad. They can't do that. You don't see anything on the computer screen. So what we found was that on 22 July, at 4 a.m., they were sleeping fine. But then on 29 July at 3:20 a.m., they couldn't sleep, and one of them had to take medication. So look at this. What is the difference between these 2 environments according to the methodology that legislation imposes on scientists? There's none. There's none. And what is the common conclusion among uninformed researchers? Oh, they're inventing. They can't be. There's no difference, not even without the DBA. So, what are they inventing? Now, remember, these 2 figures that I'm showing you, this is with the resolution of 1/3 octave band, meaning 3 data points per octave. Now, we've increased that resolution to 36 data points per octave. And look at what we found. For the layperson, this is like going from the magnifying glass to a microscope, right? what we couldn't see with the magnifying glass, there's nothing there. They have to be inventing, oops, now it's there with the microscope. And you see those peaks? This is now what we call the wind turbine acoustic signature. This is what is keeping people from sleeping. No, 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 there you're told can't be. This is below 20 hertz, right? And you can see it's below 20 hertz, so it's inaudible. So what you can't hear won't hurt you. So no, 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 this cannot be. And this is the difficulty that most health researchers have. They're still stuck in the idea that a dBA measurement will differentiate between two acoustic environments, and it won't. Not in this spectrum, not in the lower frequencies. So also by increasing, this is called increasing the spectral resolution, so from 3 data points to 36 per octave, we also increased the time resolution. So what you're seeing here is on the x-axis is 600 seconds. It's 10 minutes. We can now see what happens second by second in this environment. We no longer have to have 10-minute averages. Okay, and it's second by second, and on the y-axis you have 136 octaves, so 36 segmentations per octave, so 36 data points per octave. So this is why they couldn't sleep. They're not inventing. Why would you invent that? And so, hot off the press in the same house, just now in March, we had the court mandated stoppages of the wind power plant. And so we could see those peaks on the left side of your screen. Those were there. Those are the peaks that correspond to the wind turbine acoustic signature that I showed you. And they just disappeared when the wind power plant was stopped. So if there was any question that this was coming from a wind turbine, it's not. There's finishes that question. So again, this is why people can't sleep around wind turbines. What was the mantra again? Oh, that's right. If you can't hear it, it won't harm you. What, it'll just stop you from sleeping. Is that it? So you see, these mantras, it becomes more serious, these mantras that they feed you, when you find out what I'm next going to tell you. 1968. Oh, they knew that infrasound could affect the organism both psychologically and physiologically. Oh, wait, they knew that at the 3 to 15 hertz is where it's worse. That 1968, really, this was known. Well, this is out of a military report, so maybe it wasn't known exactly in 1968, but somebody knew. So 1960s and 70s. They're studying the effects of infrasound and low frequency within the Apollo space program. They're also studying it within the Soviet Union space program. And in 1973, organized by the National Center of Research of France, they organized a whole symposium on infrasound. Really? Nobody knows about this. Really? In still the 1970s, these are two of my favorite studies. They're so interesting. Under OSHA, Alexander Cohen studied the effect of hearing protectors, but not on the hearing. He went to study the effect of hearing protectors among factory workers on body effects, on body symptoms. And his conclusions, this is over a 2-year period, his conclusions are fascinating. He said, yes, hearing protectors are great for the hearing, but the body complaints did not reduce. And in fact, in some parameters, they increased. So the second study, also in 1970s, came out of France. And look, they're using genetically deaf mice. Okay, they're genetically deaf. And you put them in an infrasound environment and their performance decreases. And you put them in an audible noise environment and the genetically deaf mice performance does not decrease. With auditory, normal hearing mice, if you put them in infrasound or in audible sound, in both situations, their performance decreases. So you see, there's much more going on here than just the perception or, the hearing of it, if you do or if you don't, and stuff like this. Much more going on. In Russia, since at least the 2000s, they have legislation against infrasound. And I want to point out, look at them segmenting it. 2 hertz, 4 hertz, 8 hertz. They segment it. And you don't see a dBA on this table. And also, I'd like to point out, if you look to the left, they're legislating not only for workers, but also for the general public, for public areas and living quarters. This is very interesting that they would have. This is the only country I know of. I don't know what China is doing, for example, but this is the only country I know that has infrasound legislated. After the 2000s, the people who most do proper scientific studies regarding infrasound and health or biological structures, physiological responses, are the Chinese. Why the Chinese? Well, because of their space program, right? It's blast full on. There's a lot of infrasound environments in space programs, not only people that go up, but the ones that have to work on the ground. So I just want to show you the titles of the papers. I mean, they're all over. You can go and look at them in the internet. But look at the titles of the papers. They're exposing animals to much higher levels than we find in wind turbine homes, much higher levels, but only for 2 hours a day for like 14 days. You see, so another difficulty with health studies is how long do you do your study for, right? The studies that I showed you before in the 1960s within the Apollo space program, they exposed 5 male volunteers to very intense infrasound. We're talking in the hundreds of dBs, and we're talking about 80s and even 30 hertz, right? For 2 minutes. For 2 minutes. Of course, the response was terrible. They were coughing and gagging. You can read this all on the internet. So that's China, and that's why China is doing all these studies. And again, look at the titles. These are evidence, or this is evidence of the genotoxic effect of infrasound and low frequency noise. So the top left is in our laboratory back in the day. So this is the foot of a mouse or a rat, Wistar rat, who was already born in noise, meaning the mother had spent the gestation period in the noise. So the horses is a case in Portugal that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. I'll be talking a bit more about that after. Denmark, the mink farm that was completely destroyed and had to shut down. Australia, these are chickpeas. I'm sorry, these are chickens and eggs, and their feet are also affected by infrasound low frequency noise. But here, it's not wind turbines. It's not wind turbines. I know we're all here for wind turbines, right? But this is not a wind turbine exclusive issue. In fact, in our group, the first documented environmental case that we had was in '04. Look, that was the source, not a wind turbine. And we went there. This case was very fundamental for our group because we got contacted by these people out of the blue. It was the first time that people from the general public had contacted us out of the blue asking for our help because they were in a low frequency environment. And you guys have to understand, we're dealing with airplanes, military airplanes. right? And maintenance and jet engines where you have test cells for jet engines. And these people are complaining about noise. Really? Oh, come on. All right. We took their complaints. Indeed, the symptoms were similar to our workers. But, so we went there, we measured the noise, and this is still the old way, right? The 3 data points per octave. And look at the lower frequency, the one that we could measure at the time was 6.3 hertz. That's the lowest it could go, was a Brüel-Kjaer sound level meter. And so I got the data from the home with the noise, and now what do I do with it? We're in '04. What am I going to compare this to? Everything is in dBAs. Nobody's measuring low frequency. What am I going to compare it to? So I compared it to the only data we had, which was in the cockpit. And this is the comparison. I'm like, well, yes, it's a little noisy, but really, can this really justify? Again, we're coming out of the aeronautical industry. Come on, how can these people be complaining of this? So by that time, we already had a battery of medical tests that we gave people to whom we suspected might be suffering from infrasound-induced pathology. And we gave this family those tests. And boy, were we surprised. The 10-year-old boy had cardiac pathology that was comparable only to our military pilots. This is published. And we couldn't understand why. How is it that these levels made this family get so bad? And then we got it. I mean, it took a while. They're sleeping in it. Okay, the workers work from 9 to 5 or whatever their shift is, and then they go home. And this is way before wind turbines. And usually in the homes, it's much quieter. There is called in medical sciences the recovery period. Workers had the opportunity to have a recovery period. Not in this case. Not in this case. They're sleeping in it. The little boy, the mother had already spent the whole gestation period of the pregnancy in that home. So it became clearer why these people had such bad pathology, such a severe degree of pathology. Now, vibroacoustic disease nowadays is like a taboo subject. A lot of people are allergic to it, and I substituted the name to infrasound-induced pathology or infrasound low-frequency noise-induced pathology. It just tickles a lot of people, and I try to avoid it. However, I think it's interesting to see the evolution. Now, this is in workers. Exposure time is from 9 to 5, weekends, and after 9 to 5 and weekends, they're at home. So recovery period exists and is significant. And this is how they developed the clinical stages as per years of occupational activity. And now here's another issue with the health sciences, right? They'll go and do a study like this and they'll do it by age. No, 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 no. This is not by age. This is by exposure time. When you're dealing with physical agents of disease, you have to take exposure time, cumulative and prior exposure time, into consideration. Now, what we see in residential residences that are contaminated with infrasound is whether it's wind turbines or not. What we see as all this evolution of symptoms is accelerated. So it doesn't take 1 to 4 years for them to start developing the bronchitis, the mood swings, the indigestion. No, it takes about a year. And then it doesn't take 4 to 10 years to get the, inflammation of the stomach lining, chest pain, back. No, it doesn't take that long if you're living in it. So I just wanted to show you that this is how it goes. We've seen it time and time again, not in an aeronautical workers, but in people that live in contaminated homes. I was in Australia in 2016, and this is another example where it's not wind turbines. It's not wind turbines. And I want to show you the desperation of these people who are building around their house a concrete wall in the hopes of preventing the noise from coming in. Now, remember what I told you before? How thick does this wall have to be? And you have to make it like an igloo, right? Because also the top. But this shows, it speaks to the desperation of people, how bothered they are. You really think people who are inventing symptoms are going to go through the trouble of building a cement wall around their house to no avail? Remember the thickness? Anyway, back to wind turbines, shall we? This is our Portuguese case, so this is our first wind turbine case of the group. We presented this in the Wind Turbine Noise Conference in 2007. This case went all the way up to the Supreme Court in Portugal, and those 4 wind turbines were in fact taken down. But you see, between 2007 and 2013, they put up more wind turbines. And the court case was only for those 4. So the man won the battle but lost the war. So as you can see, this is still the old way of measuring noise. It only goes down to 6.3 hertz. And this is at the same wind speed. So residual, the red, is when the wind turbines were off. And the black and the gray is when they were on during the night and the daytime at the same wind speed. So you can see there is a clear difference. And of course, none of this is in dBAs. This is Germany. Germany has, these are all the old wind turbines, so the smaller ones. So they have the wind turbines surrounding them sort of from the east and from the south of their home. They have a little lake on the right. This German case was then published as well. You can see on the top left, this is the bedroom that they had to abandon. They actually, their business is in their home. So they can't just like up and leave. It's not an easy thing for them. So instead, they built what we call the bunker bedroom. So they had these stairs come down from the kitchen, and on the right, you see their bunker bedroom. And I asked them, is it better? Look, if bunker bedrooms are the solution, well, fine. Maybe the government can subsidize bunker bedrooms. I don't know. And they answered, and I quote them, "Oh, it's much better, except when the winds are from the east. Then we get the diarrheas." I'm quoting. This is a diary of a person who lives under wind turbines in Scotland. And as you can see, what she did is she put the dates of when she felt these symptoms. And I pulled up a close-up for you to see. So on July 4th, she didn't sleep well. And then from July 5th through the 9th, continuously she has pain in the ears. Then on top of the pain in the ears, on the 6th, she gets nauseated. And on the 7th, she has vertigo, dizziness. So this is a diary of a person living under wind turbines in Scotland. The last thing I'd like to discuss with you guys is this idea of nocebo effect. Now, the people who have come up with this idea, most of them are not medically trained, if any of them. And look, you can't really blame them, right? Remember that slide I showed you where there were both, the DBAs were practically the same, and in one side they're sleeping and on the other side they're not. Remember that? How can you blame the uninformed researcher for assuming that it's in their heads? It has to be. Look, there's no difference in the DBAs, and one is complaining and the other is not. It has to be in their heads, right? So we have already shown that it's not in their heads. There's something called the acoustic signature. There's something that they can't sleep. I don't care if it's what you can't hear can't hurt you. I don't care about that. They can't sleep in the presence of the acoustic signatures, right? So we've shown that. Even if we hadn't, even if we hadn't had all this data to show you, right? Nocebo effect, really? Well, what about the animals, right? Are they suffering from some psychosomatic nocebo effect because they're not getting money from the wind industry because they're annoyed? Is that it? Is that why all the cows are having all these problems? In Poland, they studied geese and they also studied the pigs. What they're all having these problems. Geese and pigs are two different families of animals. But then you have frogs in Japan. So now you have three families of animals that are being affected by wind power plants or by the acoustic emissions of wind power plants. Nocebo, also, they all have psychosomatic things going on in their brains, which is making them sick. Is that it? Please. So, on this depressing note, I'm terminating my presentation. And of course, I'm up for questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Marianne. I'll sit here so that I can actually see all the emails back and forth that I sort of don't get to see face to face. So, like I said, I've been fascinated with your research. Just so everyone knows too, recently Goulburn opened up a dizzy clinic for vertigo and dizziness. And because I get the vertigo, I get the dizziness, my husband gets it, the dog gets it. So it's having a massive impact. And I went to this new clinic which is open. He's actually said that he would look at coming out and meeting and testing other residents in this area that are suffering the same impact. I know there's you get an itch in the air, but if I shake my head, it actually feels like the brain is bruised and it's debilitating. The brain fog, like everything that you can think of happened. Another gentleman sitting here was saying as he turns off onto his road, he'll work in Sydney and he's fine, comes home and loses his hearing. I lost my hearing for 3 weeks. In both ears, was gone. And no one will do, they've done MRIs, like the whole lot. So there is much more to this than what people are aware of. So thank you for what you're doing. The other one, which you probably are aware, Dr. Ursula Bellet State, she's been emailing me as well, and they've actually this new research where they went and tested 18,000 within 3 different communities with the translation as it comes through. The townships where there was wind turbines placed had a 68% rate of heart attacks and heart disease in comparison to 21% in non-host areas. So,
well, that can't be surprising to anybody since the study of Professor Wahl in Germany, who showed that 16 hertz directly applied to the muscle. This is not annoyance. This is not even going through the human. It's directly applied to the muscle tissue, yielded a reduction of the contraction power of the muscle. Direct application of 16 hertz. So, this is not surprising. It's just sad that nobody's doing anything. Nobody, the powers that be. I mean, you see, as I've said before many times, in my opinion, this is my opinion, the science is there. The science is all there since the 1968 at least. So it's the political will that isn't. And as I've said many times before, even though I've been urged to do so, I do not get involved in the political arena because this is not my thing. I'm a scientist. I don't care. I mean, I do in that, but there's nothing that I could, as a scientist, I mean, I have to become a politician to actually do things. They'll probably kill me before I even get to a position where I could do something. So, um, I stay with the science, and the science that I see and that many others see, it's not just me, in terms of the health effects, is there. It's been there for years. It's and you can't, you always have to go back to what happened with asbestos, right? Come on, in the 1940s, we knew that asbestos was bad and was especially in submarine workers and in the military. We knew asbestos was bad, but there was no economically viable alternative, right? So it kept on going until an economically viable alternative emerged. And now asbestos is really bad. Let's sue everybody that was involved. Human nature, I suppose. There's
I find it fascinating, and because here we do get caught up with the politics of it as well, but that people such as yourself, Professor Matson, Professor Kennedy, virtually are told to go away by the political sides. And this is from people that have got no qualification, like maybe economics, or one of the politicians in New South Wales who refuses to listen to anybody. Her, uni degree was in food preparation. It's like, how can these people then say that these things are safe for us to live with? But yeah,
that's a whole nother topic. You have to, make a whole nother meeting for that, just for that.
Does
It's,
anyone got any questions they would like to ask? Everybody's in shell shock, I think. Yeah. Question coming.
Okay.
Hi, Rob.
Hi.
Hi. During Professor Matson's talk, he spoke about the impact of cortisol production with infrasound increasing cortisol production and being a stressor for the symptoms that you've described. Have you got any comment on cortisol production and that being a mechanism around this neurological disturbance, please?
Well, cortisol is a way that the body has to react immediately to a stressful situation. Immediately. It's a band-aid. All right. You cannot sustain high levels of cortisol over extended periods of time. Your body has other mechanisms that if you're going to have to sustain high levels of cortisol, they bring that back down. The body brings it back down, and other mechanisms kick in. You cannot sustain a high level. This is when cortisol increases in a stress reaction response, it's an immediate response. It's not a long-term response. So, you see, any study that is, and I have to mention this because this is the basic design flaw, the severe design flaw of many studies, which is like this migraine study that perhaps this person's going to come and do. Look, you have to stratify the study population by prior noise exposure. How could you possibly think that it would be okay to go into a house where there's a family and the guy is a retired RAF pilot, right? And the woman is a housewife? You really think they're going to have the same reaction to wind turbine noise? Really? It's not. It's like, look, it's like if you're studying radiation, right? And you don't select who is a radiology technician in your population study. That person will have more exposure than any of the other people. You cannot compare them. So, one of the huge difficulties, just like everything else in our world now, everything has to be streamlined. Well, you cannot streamline health studies. You must sit down or come up with a proper questionnaire, but you must sit down with each individual that you want to study and gather what their prior noise exposure is. And then you study the people that are little prior noise exposure moderate prior noise exposure, and severe prior noise exposure. That's how you do properly designed noise studies. This is a physical agent of disease. So, going back to the cortisol, do you really think that the XRAF pilot who now lives under wind turbines is going to have the same cortisol response as the housewife, the homemaker? I'm sorry, totally politically incorrect to say housewife now, right? The homemaker, right? So, do you really think they're going to have the same reaction? They won't. They won't. So, again, this cortisol level, it's fine. Go ahead if that's what you're getting funded for, because then scientists have a different other problem, right? Who funds their science? You can't just go off and do science on your own. You don't have funding for it. And they won't fund stuff that have to do studies that have to do with infrasound, especially good studies that have to do with infrasound. They won't fund them. They'll call it a low priority topic. So, yes, any study is good, but cortisol studies for me, for our team, or with our history, cortisol studies are, a waste of time. Well, they're interesting. You shouldn't not do them, but it's in the big scheme of things, it's not really good. And especially if you don't and what? Oh, wait. And what? You're going to measure the noise in dBAs? Yeah. Uh-huh. So what are you comparing when you do these studies? Anyway, sorry, I just had to say that.
Any other questions? Yep, we've got another one.
Okay.
Hi there, I'm Gary.
Hi, Derek.
You mentioned that infrasound penetrates the ground.
It can.
Is there any studies or signs that it has an effect on, plants or trees or groundwater?
Yes. Well, I do occasionally stumble across. I've never seen a study with underground plants. And what I mean, roots, how infrasound would affect the roots. Um, there are people in a different type of studies of acoustics, and they study the sounds that trees make and that plants make. And so my thing would be, hey, can we get you near a wind turbine plant, trees near when I mean, as you can imagine, that's not very, I mean, that's something that's on my to-do list, my bucket list, as they say. But I'm actually in touch with some of those people, and it wouldn't be that difficult. But if you're in this world of looking at the acoustics of nature, who the hell wants to go near a wind turbine? But yeah, but it's something that I've had in my mind to suggest. Now, as for the water, underground water things, I have seen some studies on that. Um, it wasn't so much about the infrasound affecting the water, underground water supplies, but it was having to do with the weight of the, what is it, 6,000 tons of cement that they have to put. Um, there are reports, if you go to some of the wind turbine noise conferences, I think there's a few over the years, there's been a few papers on the water stuff, which may be interesting.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? No. Thank you so much, Professor. And you're going to stay online. I saw Stephen is
absolutely.
Which is
I've heard Stephen before. I like Stephen. I've heard him before. He's great.
Sure, he's got. Stephen, can you hear us? It's, yeah, but it's stuck. Obviously, Mariana's screen's stuck, same as what happened to.
You might have made him the host.
I'm here. Do you still need me?
No, just going to get you to reduce your screen back so we can get Stephen on.
I did.
Yeah. I've done something here, obviously.
I'm going to just do it this way.
There we go, Steve.
Oh, g'day. Hi. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Yeah, so you got me loud and clear, have you?
Sorry?
Am
Yeah.
I starting now, am I?
Yep, if that's all right.
Yeah, okay, yep.
Did give
Yeah,
you
well, I've got to
an
just share this.
introduction of you earlier, but you weren't here, of course.
Oh, right, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I'm just down in southeast Queensland in Roma, and I was with Property Rights Australia today doing a presentation down here, so it's been a big day. So what I need to do is just share the screen.
Is he on?
Where am I? Share. Yep, go to here. Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yep.
Slideshow, play from the start. Yeah, so you can see that all right?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, so you got me loud and clear? Yeah. Yeah, so what is the scale and impact of poorly planned industrial renewable projects? Just a little bit about myself, my background. So we're an environmental charity group focused on rainforest rehabilitation and Cassowary Rehabilitation Centre. And we've been involved with the planting of trees, tens of thousands of trees, trying to connect protected areas together to create corridors and to repair riparian zones along creek banks. Yeah, so that's what we've been doing. And we also own a little plant nursery, rainforest nursery, and propagate our own trees. And we also operate the Cassowary Rehabilitation Centre. So that's a bit about our background, what we do. We do a lot of on-ground work, revegetation, reforestation. But our charter is to protect and restore biodiversity. But what we've found is that we've had this new industry come in called wind farms. And it would normally take us, say, 5 years to revegetate 5 hectares of rainforest. And these wind farms were coming in and destroying thousands of hectares overnight. And so I suppose my journey sort of started in around 2017 when I was asked to document some of the construction phases of the Mount Emerald wind farm in North Queensland. And that wind farm was the very first industrial scale wind farm in the state of Queensland. And I was very much for wind and solar, wind and sun, and very positive and supportive of such projects at the time. And what we're seeing here is a 55-metre long blade. And back in 2017, 2018, these were the biggest generation of wind turbines at the time. And that wind blade is 20 tonne. So you can sort of see the size of the infrastructure, really big components. And you have to remember that the new generation of towers, wind towers, are twice this length. So this is a 55-metre long blade. The new blades are around 85 metres long and even pushing 100 metres long for the 7.2 metre megawatt turbines. So they're very, very big pieces of infrastructure, big components, heavy, awkward, cumbersome. But I also walked the Mount Emerald Plateau many times as a bushwalker with my love of nature, walking wild areas. And this particular place used to be a very wild area. And in fact, it had 5 critically or endangered plant species. and a really good population of northern quolls. It was a really important place for biodiversity. But myself and our colleagues and people in the environmental movement were okay with this, you know, to industrialize such a place in the name of clean, green, and cheap energy, which is what we were told. But this particular location now is now an industrial site, and it's all been cut up by haulage roads, transmission towers, transmission lines, substations, and wind towers. And you have to realise that these are actually small wind towers, and the new generation are even a lot bigger than these. So the ones earmarked for Central Queensland are a lot bigger than these. To give you a sense of scale, you can see the size of a bus down below, and it's a brutal industry. To get these components up the tops of these mountains, vast amounts of civil earth moving is required to get these big, heavy components. And in actual fact, the center nacelle, the gearbox, they're around 300 to 500 tonne in weight. So these roads need to be engineered to be able to get those sort of weights up into these mountains. And I thought, well, that was the first wind farm. And I thought, well, that's going to power 90,000 homes, because that's what our politicians and the developers were telling us. And I was very naive about energy. And I thought, well, that wind farm was going to power 90,000 homes. There's 100,000 people that live in Cairns, so therefore they'd be carbon neutral. That's all we need is just one wind farm. But then shortly after that, I got wind of another wind farm just to the south called Caban. And I had a tip off that the dozers were in there working. So I went there and got the drone up and documented this wind farm construction. And again, it was the destruction of really good, high-value remnant forests. And when I say remnant forest, this is forest that hasn't been logged or cleared in the past. And they're high elevation areas. So these are our refugee areas in a warming climate. So we're supposed to be protecting these areas. Yes, so you can sort of see see what's involved. And this is only a small wind farm, only 28 wind towers. So quite a small wind farm compared to many others, which are 50 to 70 to 100 wind towers per site. Yeah, so you can sort of see the amount of clearing. And this is particularly the case in Queensland, where our wind resources are up the tops of the mountains. And that's where the wind is. So you can sort of see what they do here. They cut off the tops of the ridges and put in the concrete foundations. Those concrete foundations are around 1,000 cubic metres of reinforced steel and cement. And they can't be reused because of the concrete fatigue that they experience through the duration of their life. So in, say, 25 years' time, when they're decommissioned, those concrete foundations need to remain and new foundations need to be put in. So a vast amount of cement and material. And you can sort of see here what they do to the hillsides. They cut benches into the hills, huge amounts of explosives and rock-breaking machinery to be able to get the trucks in there. They need to get 800-tonne cranes onto the site to lift the 300-tonne nacelle gearboxes. But the locals of the area of Caban, they were really unaware of the scale and the impact. And they're really angry people now. They're suffering health impacts from low frequency noise. They've seen a diminishing wildlife presence in their region. All the raptors and birds have gone. And they also get flashing lights at night. So the residents were unaware of the scale. They were really misled in regards to the scale of the turbines and the low frequency sound that they would emit to the local communities nearby, which is Ravenshoe, Tamulan and Caban. And they were unaware of the lights at night. So the residents, when they look out to the western skyline, they see lights, red lights, which they weren't told in the consultation phase. And like I said, we're seeing dead birds and bats. And every time I go into the Caban wind farm and go to the bases, I always see a minimum of at least one dead bird or bat. and some really important species like the Pacific swift, which is an international migratory species, a whole variety of bats. And then you even go to the site and you see half dead bats that have been impacted. Being hit by the turbine. This is a little red flying fox. So I had to call a wildlife carer, came in and euthanized the bat. And I've only been in there just a few times in the last year or so. So the mind boggles on what is the amount of dead bird and bats. What is the quantity? So I thought, well, this is just crazy. This is just 2 wind farms in my neighbourhood. What is coming next? And so it's at Australian Biodiversity Alliance, we started putting our heads together and collating all of the wind farms and solar and best batteries that we know of in Queensland by going through the EPBC web portal, the state planning websites, and also the websites of the developers. And we collated all the data. So what we can see here is 316 projects that are in the pipeline for Queensland. And you've got the name of the project, the technology type, and then a website. And the website has a direct link to the web portal where that project is. So everything is verifiable. And if we look at it in pure numbers, if they were all to be built, we're looking at 5,175 wind towers. To facilitate that, you're looking at around 7,000 kilometres of new haulage roads to put in all these wind towers across all the mountains of Queensland. New South Wales actually deleted, I think I deleted that slide, I'm sorry. But New South Wales is far worse than that. Your state has around 9,000 wind towers proposed, far more than Queensland. And we hear a lot in the media about Kidston pumped hydros being a really good renewable project. And the Greens really talk this up as being a great project. And on the face of it, it seems like a good project. You can see that you've got the old unused or exhausted old mining dams, pits. And they're going to be the pumped hydro, the dam facilities. And then you've got the tailings dam, which is now covered in solar. So on the face of it, it looks like it's a fairly good renewable energy project. There's no destruction of forests, but no one talks about stage 2, which is required to facilitate it and make it viable. And this involves the clearing of 2,400 hectares of a really important regional ecosystem called Thermida Forest, which looks like this. So every time I keep looking at renewable projects, I just see that they have really big impacts. So I did a trip down to New South Wales and looked at some of the solar farms down there, Beryl Solar Farm, for example. And, we've all been conditioned to think that solar farms can coexist with livestock, and they do, but I'm yet to find a solar farm that does coexist. And I do, I've been told that there's sheep that run underneath the solar panels at Wellington, and that might be the case, but I haven't seen any with my own eyes. And I've been to quite a few. And so I asked the neighbours here, where's the livestock? Where are the sheep? And they said, well, the sheep were introduced and they got caught up on the hydraulic rams that tilt the panels, and 2 died. And the other sheep were nibbling on the cables and wrecking the kit. So they pulled the sheep out. And I don't know if that's indicative of most solar farms. In Queensland, we don't run sheep. We run cattle, beef cattle. And beef cattle is completely uncompatible with solar farms. This is Waluga Solar Farm in Queensland. Top left photo, you can see a solar farm right off in the distance underneath the foothills of the hills, and one in the foreground. That's all going to be joined together with solar. So there'll be another big solar farm there in the middle, and then another big solar farm off to the right. But this one here was built in 2021. And then the next year, 30% of all the panels were destroyed in a hailstorm event. And neighbours said that they all got taken off the frames, put on the ground. A bulldozer came in, picked them up, put them in a tip truck, and we assume they all went to landfill. So if you look at, say, Queensland, and we start looking at the spatial data, like it's fine to say, well, there's 5,000 wind towers proposed, but what does that look like on a map? So myself and colleagues, we've done this mapping to showcase where these projects are. Sorry about that. Yeah, so if we just zoom in, for example, between Gladstone and Rockhampton, you can see where the existing transmission lines are. They're dark grey lines. And just in the last 4 years, under the Albanese federal government, these are all the projects that have come up for approval with the Federal Department of Environment. So all the red lines, they're the footprints of all the haulage roads, proposed haulage roads for the wind farms. And that's the current state of play. And there is actually more wind farms just to the south, which I haven't put on this map yet. So you can sort of see what's going on here. You've got wind farms that are populating all of the areas along the existing transmission lines that are outside of the protected areas like national parks and nature refuges and state forests. So, they're tapping into the high voltage lines, and then they're seeking out the mountains that are adjacent to get the wind turbines up on top of the mountains. So for example, if we just look at Lotus Creek, just this one here, this one's under construction right now. And you can see that the haulage roads are going into this green colour, and that is what we classify as remnant forests that haven't been touched before. These forests are protected under the Vegetation Management Act in Queensland. You're not allowed to clear this sort of forest. Even farmers cannot clear this land for cattle or anything. But the wind industry can come in and do as they please. So for example, this photo on the right, that's a drone photo of the range of mountains. And then the image on the left, you can see the red lines, which are the edges of the proposed haulage roads, and the black dots are where the turbines are going. This is only just a small part of this project. There's 48 wind towers. And so this is how it used to look. And now the ridge lines are being cut to pieces. Beautiful country here, Lotus Creek Wind Farm site. This bit of country here's all been cleared for a laydown area for workers and dongers. So all that forest is gone. And basically all the ridges you see in the distance have already now been cleared, and they've been dynamited out with explosives. Koala and ironbark having a good feed. Yeah, so this forest is now gone. It's been bulldozed in the name of clean and green energy. Yeah, so this is a really beautiful big chunk of intact wilderness forest. The ecologists found 101 koalas in the development footprint and 138 greater gliders. All the ridges in the distance are now gone. They've been flattened. I'll just fast forward a little bit more. So there's high voltage lines going over this gorge. So they've cleared either side, and then they'll use a helicopter to hang transmission lines over the gorge. That mound there's now been dynamited out. That's a rock quarry in the foreground. There's 3 concrete batching plants on the site, up the north side, south side, and in the middle.
It's truly shocking what I'm seeing.
Yes.
Mined.
Yes. And I just recently went up in a helicopter. I'm just fast forwarding this for you. And this is what it looks like from a helicopter taken about 4 months ago. You can see the drilling rig there on the ridge that's drilling vertical holes, and then they put dynamite explosives into those holes and blast those ridges out. That's the site of one turbine foundation. So these roads are about 70 metres wide from toe to toe, considering all the cut and fill. Yeah, so this is what's going on. It's just insane. Yeah, blasting out ridge lines. So this was taken by a worker on site. Yeah. Yeah, so it's far more efficient and quick to use explosives. And I think if people realised how brutal this industry is on the landscape, they'd think twice about renewable energy, or this type of energy. If we look at, say, Clark Creek, for example, we've got all the haulage roads going into remnant forest. We've even got haulage roads going into colour yellow, which is of concern, which is really out of bounds. No one is allowed to clear these forests, but the wind industry it just gets a free kick. So you can see this is the Clark Creek wind farm. They start clearing the ridge lines, and then they blast it out and bench it all out for turbines. All those mountains in the distance, if you look closely on the left, you can see where they've started clearing the ridge lines. And that's all been destroyed now. And then in the far distance is the Lotus Creek wind farm. And that's now with all the turbines up, looking south. And that's looking north. So there's 100 wind turbines in this development. Stage 2, there'll be another 94 towers off into the distance, and then another 48 wind towers off in the far distance on those far, far horizon ridge lines. If we look at, say, Moa Creek, for example, this is another one that's sitting with Murray Watt for approval. You can see all the cleared land on the left, and then this beautiful plateau of intact vegetation to the right. It's a really big plateau, but the wind industry wants to blast out the tops of those cliff lines for wind towers. So you can see what's going there. So the tops of those ridges are going to get blasted out. That's Black Mountain on the left. They need to knock that mountain down by about 20 meters, so chop the top of it off to try to bring down the elevation of the towers so it doesn't trigger issues with the aviation industry. So they're willing to knock the tops off mountains to try to lower the heights of some of these towers, so they don't have to install aviation lights and things like that. This gentleman bought this big block of land. He owns all the land in the foreground and put a nature refuge covenant over it. And now he's got the wind farm coming up right onto the boundary. And that middle ridge line you see there will be carved up and towers put onto that. And then all those distant ridges you see in the distance, they'll all be carved up as well. And this is flying over in a helicopter. Basically, every ridge line, every mountaintop you see here will be blasted out. If we go to, say, Boulder Creek, this is one that's now under construction right now. I forgot to say that with that Lotus Creek wind farm, that was first set up by Eperon. That got a number of approvals in place. Then they sold it to Arc Energy, which is owned by Korea Zinc. They then sold the project to Vestas. Vestas sold it to Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners. And then Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners sold it to CS Energy. And CS Energy is a state-owned corporation. So it's owned by us, the taxpayers. And we paid 1.3 billion with a B for that project. And this is another one, Boulder Creek wind farm. So we as taxpayers have bought this wind farm. So huge amounts of clearing as well, all remnant forests. Yeah, so huge amounts of civil earth moving. And all that land there that's been cleared, that's for a substation. So a substation is going in there, and all those mountains in the distance, they're all going to be blown away, blasted out for wind towers. Mount Hopeful, I'll just skip over this one. This is a place that is just completely criminal. It's sacrilege to clear this. But this has already been approved. Not Anastasia Palaszczuk, but Plebiscite has already approved this project. This involves a clearing of, I think, about 2,000 hectares of classified remnant forests. And so what we do also is do 3D animations for regional communities to see where these turbines are going across the landscape. The vertical height of these turbines is disproportionate. They're a lot higher than what they are in real life. But I just wanted to show people the nature of the terrain of where these turbines are going. Yeah. Yeah, so the Upper Calliope solar farm in the foreground, that's around 5,000 hectares of solar. That's the Callide Ranges. Smoky Creek solar in the bottom, that's 2,000, I think 400 hectares of solar. These are all proposed. These have not been built yet. These are all proposals. Yes. And then Moonlight Range. So we had a win just recently with the state LNP party. They stopped this one which is really, the state government's only ever stopped 2. This is one of them. But what the developers have done with this particular project, the state government stopped it. So Brookfields, the owners, they're a $1 trillion Canadian-owned fund manager. They've then gone, well, stuff you, state government, we'll go straight to Murray Watt and we'll get federal approval and we'll overturn your decision anyway. So this is the arrogance of the industry, where they think they can go straight to the federal government and overturn state legislation. And that's a 3D model that I've done of Moonlight Range, just showing where the haulage roads are earmarked to go over this mountain range. But one of the most proudest pieces of work that we've done with Australian Biodiversity Alliance is what we call the Australian Renewables Map. And so if you go to www.australianrenewables.app, you'll see all the work that we've done in putting in all the proposed wind farms and solar and best batteries to the best of our knowledge across Australia. So we really recommend that you go to australianrenewables.app and check it out, and share that with all your neighbours and your friends. So for example, if we go to that website and just look at your area down there in New South Wales, you can see the Crookwell turbines. So the orange dots are the existing turbines that are operational, and the yellow dots are the ones that are proposed. The mustard areas, they're proposed solar. And you can see the HumeLink transmission corridor in pink that we've just recently mapped and put onto the map. So it's a really good resource for people to use to show spatial footprint. And it shouldn't be us volunteers doing this work. This should be done by Chris Bowen and the federal government and state government agencies. But I think they're too scared, obviously, to show Australians the scale of what's going on, because I think everyone would be horrified. So if you look at what's going on across the nation and with all our mapping, if all of those wind farms were built, there would be 46,000 kilometres of haulage roads. The total surface area of existing solar is around 29,000 hectares. But if all the solar is built, well, then you're looking at around 447,000 hectares. The number of wind towers that are commissioned and operational at the moment in Australia is 4,669. And there's another proposed 31,000 earmarked yet to be built. And the total capital cost is about 1.3 trillion if you add up all of the capital costs of this. And you have to remember that that excludes pumped hydro and transmission lines. So Chris Bowen was given this data back in October last year, our Federal Energy Minister. And he was asked on the floor of Parliament House, is this data right? Is there 447,000 hectares of solar? Is it going to cost 1.3 trillion? How many wind towers are proposed? And he still hasn't answered the question. He ducked and weaved and went on a tangent, and he's never come back with an answer. They really don't know. They do know, and they don't want the Australian public to know. So, and this is the closest we've got to what we think is going on across the nation. So if you look at Australia, they're all the existing renewables. These are all the maps of with the map with all the proposed renewables. But you have to remember, to get to net zero, we also need to decarbonise our electric vehicle fleet, and we also need the production of industrial heat for things like glass, aluminium, steel, cement production. So to try to get to net zero, you need to generate new forms of energy with industrial heat. So what there's a group called Net Zero, and it's a consortium of the University of Queensland and Princeton University. And they've tried to map, if we were to go to net zero, what is the spatial footprint required, and can it be put in areas of low biodiversity and low agricultural productivity? And this is the map that they've come up with. So what they've said is, yeah, it can be done, but we will need about 7 times the spatial footprint of the size of Tasmania to do such a thing. And to me, this is dystopia. But you look at who paid and who financed for this study, and it was the Minderoo Foundation, which is Andrew Forrest, a big wind proponent. the Australian Conservation Foundation, the Climate Council, so they know that vast amounts of land is required, but they're not being honest with the Australian people with what is really going on. And this is what's really going on. So if we look at the mapping, if you go to the Australian Renewables map that we've done, and you pull up the layer with all the RES zones, renewable energy zones, they're all those mustard coloured ellipsoid polygons. So they're all the RES zones that are supposed to be the recipients of all this of all the renewable energy technology, all the wind farms and solar. So, for example, the central west RES, I think up on the New England tableland, north of where you are, that's earmarked to have about 6 gigawatts of installed capacity of wind in that renewable energy zone. So in reality, you've got all the academics saying, oh yeah, it can all be done, but you can put it all up in the really low biodiversity areas. But that is not what's being done. These projects are being put in the most easiest and cheapest places, hard up against existing transmission infrastructure. And the developers can cherry pick where they want to go, which are the cheapest locations. And that is the reality of what's happening in Australia. There is no central planning. It's just ad hoc, chaotic, random randomness. And that was actually said by the previous infrastructure commissioner. He said that the renewable energy rollout is ad hoc and chaotic, and we're going to end up with stranded assets and a duplication of assets because there's no coordination whatsoever. So why do we need so many wind towers? Because when I first got involved in this, I thought, well, just one wind farm would be enough. But it's not. So when politicians and developers say, oh, well, this wind farm is going to power 90,000 homes or 150,000 homes, it doesn't do that. So the Mount Emerald wind farm, which is the first wind farm that I showed you this evening, it never, ever generated its full capacity of 180 megawatt in the whole year. So it never delivered power to 90,000 homes. In actual fact, most of the time it's delivering power between below 10 megawatts, which is that low, the bar at the bottom. So you can sort of see that the capacity factors are really low, and then they move upwards in a diminishing way. So they get less and less efficient, really. And if we look at it in this respect, for 21 days, the Mount Emerald wind farm produced zero energy and zero electricity cumulatively. And this is a $500 million piece of kit. And for 21 days, it generated nothing. For 50% of the time, for 182 days, it produced less than 39 megawatts of output capacity. And this is $500 million worth of gear. So this is why we need so many wind farms, because of its low capacity factor. This one here only ran at 22% of its installed capacity. And then I started delving into, well, who owns the Mount Emerald wind farm? And this is applicable to all the wind farms. But this one here, for example, is owned by RACH. And the majority owner, the majority shareholder of RACH is the Thai royal family. And in 2022, it had an income of $161 million. And it's now listed as one of the top 100 companies in Australia that pays no tax. And this is taken off the ABC website because they publish the top 100 companies that pay no tax in Australia every year. And then the following year, it made $212 million. And my head boggles, how is it making so much money when it's not generating the electricity that's required? It's such a poor generation of electricity. And you might have heard of the integrated system plan. It's the holy grail, the holy Bible of Chris Bowen, our energy minister. And our whole energy system is based on this graph, really. And what we're looking at here is a graph going to 2050. And what we need to do is phase out of black coal. So coal's at the bottom, the black coal, the brown coal, and we need to overbuild the electricity system by a factor of 6. So it says that down the bottom of this report, and increase it 6-fold by 2050. So we need to replace a very stable energy system that delivers, 90% capacity factors with coal, with intermittent, unreliable energy. And we need to overbuild the system to try to harvest as much energy as we can from as many wind turbines as possible, because a lot of them aren't going to be working. So that's what we need to do. So the light yellow up the top is our rooftop solar, dark yellow is utility solar, green is onshore wind. The purple color is coordinated storage. And that is a hypothetical. That is the assumption that you and I will buy Tesla Powerwall batteries for our homes. We will buy electric cars, and then we'll all have smart meters in our homes. And then the government will be able to extract energy out of our appliances, like our home batteries and our electric cars, to keep the lights on at night, to keep hospitals operating and airports and all those sort of important utilities that we take for granted today. So, so we're basing our future energy generation on hypotheticals that have really not been tested anywhere in the world. And a big part of our dispatchable energy will be home batteries being taken out of our control and put into the grid. And mind you, we also need to build that dark blue down the bottom, the aqua blue, that's flexible gas. So we need to build another 15 gigawatts of installed gas capacity to ramp up and down on standby for when there is no wind and sun. So we need to build 2 energy systems. One's renewables and another one is gas. So we need to pay for 2 energy systems. And then if we start talking about hydrogen, which is required for things like industry, there's many of these projects all around the country, and they're completely delusional in my my understanding. This is the Murchison Green Energy Hub on the coast of WA. This has already been underwritten by the Bowen Albanese government by the tune of $800 million to Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners. And that is to underwrite the production of hydrogen to make it more commercially viable for this company to sell the hydrogen. This project alone has 700 wind turbines and 10,000 hectares of solar. I can't even imagine 10,000 hectares of glass. And then places like this, the adjacent Kalbarri National Park, if it was to proceed, would have wind towers all across the skyline of really significant tourism places, like this particular spot called Nature's Window on the Murchison River. And then we've got conservation friends in the Nullarbor in WA frantically trying to get the Nullarbor cave system listed as a World Heritage Area before the wind towers come in, because no doubt these caves are quite shallow, and the construction phase for the concrete foundations will have impacts on these caves. And these are some of the biggest caves on Earth. These are limestone caves, and they're worthy of World Heritage listing. And this is the predicament we're in, where we're trying to scramble to save these important icon areas before the renewable energy industry comes in and potentially destroys them. And this is the scale of this particular project. This is 3,000 wind turbines, 60 million solar panels in this one project. And this is sitting with Murray Watt right now for approval. It's actually got to a point where it's now with the Federal Environment Minister for approval. The state government are pushing it. They want it to go ahead. They're pushing it. This is jobs and growth and development, and to hell with the caves that are underneath. Just get it done. And if you overlay this one wind farm over the state of Victoria, that is how big this one wind farm is over the state. It's huge. It's monstrous. People don't understand the scale of these things. If you put this wind farm over Tasmania, that's the scale of it. One third of the size of Tasmania is the size of this hydrogen hub. So from my perspective, the environment doesn't stand much of a chance with these industrial scale renewables. particularly here in Queensland with what I'm seeing with my own two eyes. And we hear it constantly, we need renewable energy. And you might have heard that the federal government has amended the EPBC Act recently. And from a conservation perspective, we wanted to amend the Act for the last decade, because it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, which is protect matters of national environmental significance. But now that there's a $1 trillion renewable industry claiming that the Act is slowing them down, it took 3 or 4 weeks for the new Act to be implemented. It went straight through Parliament in lightning speed. And the reason it went through in lightning speed is to facilitate the rollout of renewables across the country, and also to facilitate the critical mineral mining that's required to facilitate it. That is the fundamental reason why the EPBC, the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, was rushed through the Parliament. But from my perspective, we need biodiversity. That is the most important thing, and it's something that we're not discussing, and no one in the climate change narrative is talking about biodiversity. We need to leave trees in the ground. Our best carbon sequesters are trees. So we need to leave those in the ground. And this is a new graph that I've just been given. I've known about this graph for quite a while, but I just want to show you that our emissions have not even fallen with all of this new technology. So with the billions of dollars that you and we've all spent on rooftop solar, wind farms and utility solar farms, our emissions have only dropped 3% by the use of renewables. The majority of our emission reductions has been through a thing called land use change, which is the prevention of broad-scale land clearing. And I've just been here at a conference today with a lot of these landowners, and they're really upset about it because they're unable to clear what we class as regrowth, so trees that have come up. So they clear for cattle. The trees come up and they're not allowed to clear. And the idea is because that regrowth is being counted as carbon sequestration and making the figures look really good, that we're actually reducing emissions. It's clever trickery that's being used. And this is a better graph that articulates the case. So our actual emissions have only dropped, 3% or so, but the bulk of it has been the heavy lifting of our carbon emissions have come from land use changes. And if you actually go back to the net zero report that I was talking about, they said for us to achieve net zero, we would have to reforest about 7 million hectares of land with trees to sequester the carbon that's required for us to try to reach our Paris Agreement targets. So even all of this technology, the renewables, aren't really doing the heavy lifting that we're being led to believe. Yeah, so my thoughts are, should we be clearing and fragmenting forest for renewables? Are we going down the wrong path? Where is our model? And which countries are carbon free? And if we look at other countries that are trying to do this, the only other country trying to do this is Germany. And I think Germany has about 41,000 wind towers. They've spent well over $1 trillion Australian. And they're still one of the highest emitters in Europe, and they have some of the highest power prices in Europe. And what they're doing is deindustrializing. So a lot of their manufacturing is going to India, Indonesia, and China, and burning their coal to do the manufacturing that they used to do. So what we're doing is we're offshoring our emissions to other nations to reduce, and then our emissions are looking good on paper. We're reducing our emissions by offshoring our emissions to other countries. So that's my thoughts. And the solutions, I think all zero emission energy options need to be on the table. But first and foremost, we can't be clearing forests and fragmenting forests. And I'd go as far as, obviously we can't impact regional communities, high value agricultural land. And there needs to be social license and all these things before we build these projects. Yes. Yeah. So thank you for your time. And And I hope you got something out of that. And I'm not an energy engineer. I'm just someone who's taken a deep interest in what's going and trying to protect as much forests and biodiversity that I can. And the biggest threat to that right now is renewables by far. It's the biggest threat to biodiversity in this nation. Yeah, so thank you, everyone.
Steve, do you want to stop sharing your screen and I'll see, has
Yes,
anyone
yes.
got any questions they'd like to ask? Yep.
Hi. Hi, Stephen. How are you?
Hello. Hello. Good, good.
I just want to read you something here.
Yes.
Straight from our AI friends. Renewable energy projects in Australia are legally required to avoid, minimise and offset impacts on wildlife. So it's in writing. My question
Yes.
is twofold.
Yep.
Do you have any stats around what those numbers look like in terms of impacts on wildlife?
No. Yeah, so the impacts on wildlife are very hard to get because you need to do freedom of information searches to try to get that data. The government really doesn't want you to know what those impacts are. So, for example, we're trying to do a freedom of information search right now on what the ecologists saw and reported at the Lotus Creek wind farm as they were clearing the vegetation. And the government has come back and said, well, we need to pay $2,600 to get those reports. And then we don't know how much of those reports will be redacted. So we don't know. So we don't know, should we go and spend $2,600 through FOI to try to get the data? And even if we do, are we going to get redacted reports? This is how hard it is. In terms of offsets are a scam. They're just rubbish. Okay, so for example, the Upper Burdekin wind farm, there's a bird there called the red goshawk. They are the most critically endangered raptors in Australia. There's only like 70 breeding pairs left. 3 were found at the site. And it was still approved because the developer put aside an offset area for the red goshawk. But the red goshawk is going to get wiped out by the turbines. So the offsets are a complete scam. Yeah, and the offsets are just designed to facilitate business as usual. Okay, so you're going to clear 1,000 hectares of koala habitat. So we'll allocate another 2,000 hectares over here, and that can be an offset for the 1,000 hectares that we clear. But the problem with that is that 2,000 hectares as an offset is only used as an offset for the duration of the wind farm. When the wind farm gets decommissioned, that 2,000 hectares goes back to its previous use and could be cleared for another wind farm or a solar farm. It's crazy. It's really crazy.
So
Yeah.
I would just say we have the Limerick wind farm that's proposed in our area. That will,
Yep.
if it goes ahead, that will be the 11th swindle factory, I'll call it, within
Yes.
our LDA.
Yes.
And we were
Yes.
also told that they would put an offset aside for the eagles that we have here. And I
Yep.
asked them who's going to tell them where they can fly and they can't fly. And they couldn't answer
Yeah.
that question. So
Yeah.
so we're
yeah.
all very disappointed in that. So like you're saying, an offset is just pure rubbish.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's just to appease people to think that they're doing the right thing, but offsets are meaningless. Okay, so for example, the Upper Burdekin wind farm is going into an area where there's magnificent brood frogs, but they're really restricted in geography. You can't have offsets for a frog like that. They don't, because there's no other place on Earth where they exist. So there's these sort of things where offsets just don't work. Yeah, so and this is a problem with the EPBC Act. The EPBC Act facilitates these really perverse outcomes. Yep.
Any other questions? Yep.
G'day, Steve. It's Rob here, mate.
Yeah. Hello. Oh, good day. Hi, Rob. How are you?
How you going, pal?
Yeah, good.
I was really interested to hear your number of 400,000 hectares of wind farms, of solar panels.
Yes.
To give the audience here some idea, as you're aware of the analysis I've been doing on using nuclear instead, we could, in Eastern Australia, build 10 nuclear power sites on 240 hectares to balance up that sort of number you just gave us.
Yes.
400,000 hectares versus 240. And we don't need
Yes.
the transmission line. That's our alternative, folks. 24.8
Yeah, that's right.
does the job.
Yeah. Yeah, so I totally agree. And it's just not the solar. There's also the pumped hydro. So we need to dam more rivers and more valleys for pumped hydro. And Chris Bowen is saying that we need 10,000 kilometres of transmission lines. Those transmission lines are going through your backyards, through high value agriculture land, through state forests. It's just crazy. So that's what I mean. What we need to do is have all options on the table. We can't talk about an energy transition with one arm behind our back, and we need to have nuclear on the table as it needs to be on the table. Otherwise, it's crazy. In actual fact, what we're trying to do is completely impossible. It can't be done because of there's a thing that you need in the energy system called inertia. And by default, and just as a side effect of that, we have the coal power plants and the hydro plants have spinning turbines. They put a frequency into the grid, and that stabilizes the grid. Wind and sun don't offer those services, so we need to install more pieces of kit called synchronous condensers, and it becomes all really complex to try to stabilize the grid. Whereas if we can just replace retiring coal with nuclear or baseload with turbines, well, then it's job done. We can, I pull my hair out. No, because you just look at Snowy Hydro 2.0, for example, that's blown out to 42 billion. And that's not the end of it yet. It could go to 50 billion, 60 billion. That sort of money could pay for probably 4 gigawatts of baseload nuclear that runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, rain, hail, or shine for 80 years. And my argument is what we're trying to do with renewables is make energy scarce. So when something becomes scarce, it becomes expensive. So when something is scarce, what we want to do is make energy abundant and bring down the price and so nuclear can do that. We have energy abundancy, and then that drives down prices. We look at our coal plants in Queensland, for example, they've been paid off. They're all paid off. And that's why we've had the cheapest prices on earth in any industrial nation. We've had the cheapest prices because we've been using cheap baseload, centralized. We've all been shipping in for a centralized grid. But now we're putting in all this intermittent, unreliable technology with all this new kit, pumped hydro, synchronous condensers. And it's all becoming really expensive based on the wind. It becomes unreliable, and then it becomes so expensive. So I was very anti-nuclear, but the further I've gone down this path, I've realised that nuclear is really the no-brainer. And I had to put all my ideology aside, read books, talk to energy professionals, talk to people like Rob Parker, and understand the technology, and then realize that it's an incredible energy resource, whereby we can just really transition from retiring coal plants to nuclear, like for like, job done, net zero, next issue. And so that's what I think is the solution. Yeah.
Another question, Steve. I know you're tired.
Yes,
sorry.
yes. That's all right. Yeah, it's all right. It's been a big day. It's all right.
Nice to meet you, Steve. Just a
Yeah,
curiosity.
thanks.
My name's Tina. We've
Hi, Tina.
actually got a wind farm in state forests in Tumut in New South Wales.
Okay.
I suppose.
Yes.
Now, you've mentioned solar, you've mentioned wind. Do you know anything about the BESSs, the battery energy storage systems? Because that seems to be coming up as a concern as well. And where we
Yes.
are located, we had a public meeting last night, and there was mention that, and don't quote me on this, but it was mentioned by some of the members in our community that said that if those battery storage systems do catch a light, you don't put them out. They've got to burn themselves out. That could be a rumour,
Yeah.
but that was something that was raised. And do you know anything about that side of the renewable energy?
Yeah, so I'm not, yeah, so I'm not that clued up with BESS batteries, but what I do know is that there's so many of them proposed. And the problem that I have with them is that they're just a short-term solution. You've got to actually generate excess energy to charge the batteries, so then they can discharge when you need the energy. So we actually need more wind farms to make them work. In terms of battery fires, yes, it is a real concern, and there's been a number of battery fires around the nation. Actual facts, the Waluga, or not Waluga, Wudalga solar farm, they had a battery fire back in the early days. There's been quite a few fires around the place. In actual fact, in California, just late last year, they had the biggest battery fire ever. A lot of their batteries burnt down in one big mega blaze, and it took firefighting crews days and days to extinguish that fire. So look that one up. But it is a big issue. Yeah, lithium the batteries. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? I think we're right, Stephen. Really appreciate. And just so
Okay.
everyone's aware, all these groups, Steve, and groups from all around the world are just constantly talking with each other. Our inboxes are full the whole
Yes.
time, so we all connect and everybody's trying to
Yes.
support everybody else through this mess.
Yeah.
So really
Yeah, and that's
appreciate
right.
it, Steve.
Yeah. No, great. Well, thank you so much. I hope I didn't delay your night.
No.
No, okay, yeah.
Ivan's still to come if you want to hang around and
Oh,
listen
yeah, good.
to
Great.
Ivan.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'll hang around. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Terry, do you want to weave your magic in with you? I know, so we get Ivan. Ivan, will you be able
So,
to?
so Cheryl, can you set up the screen sharing for me?
I can't. He's got it from his end.
Yeah, what you do, Ivan, down below this share on your screen. Making that.
Yeah, he's right. He's on.
Oh, you're up.
I can't share his screen.
The only way we can do it, Ivan, is you've got to share your screen. Ivan, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I can't share the screen.
So down below on the toolbar, have you got a toolbar down below?
Yeah,
And see, it
it's
should
got
say-
share, but when I click it, it says host disabled, participant screen sharing.
Oh. Hang on 2 seconds. Host disabled.
Everyone's just getting. I'm going to try something else here. So Ken, I think he's still there. Who was Remember before we had.
Unless you go, what about view proton?
No, so remember before you've got to uncut, someone's a co-host. Remember we had co-hosts before?
Well, that was very
You are now
Yeah, it says you're the host, Cheryl, not me.
Yeah, so we're just trying to,
Okay.
now we got you, Ivan.
try that now.
Try that now.
Okay, I have a good. Yeah, it's working now, I think. So can you see my screen?
No. So you need to hit share.
Well, I did click on it. Okay, I'll close the presentation again.
Going again, so sit down and behave yourself.
I can see the screen, the entire screen.
There we go.
It's not me.
It's coming up
So-
now, Ivan.
So are you now seeing my screen?
Yep, sure
Yeah,
can.
I think so. So is that a full screen or not?
No. You gotta minimize that one on the top.
No,
No.
leave it. Yep, it's right, Ivan.
Okay, so you can see it, can you?
Yep.
No, I've still got partial screen here. What's going on?
Well, it's full
Yeah, that's
screen for
fine.
everybody here.
Okay. Well. So have you got a full screen or not?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Well, I'm going to get straight into it. In this talk, I'm really relating to the question of infrasound because in February this year, I stayed with Rafe Champion. I stayed with Cheryl, and we learned about the problem that she had. And since then, we've learned about Ken Matson. I've been very busy, though, opposing zero carbon. It's futile. Sooner or later, we have to decide that it's not even worth attempting. At the moment, we have 91% of our energy in Australia, solar and fossil fuel energy, 41% diesel, or oil, I should say, 25% each for gas and coal. That makes 91%. So there's no chance that we will ever achieve what the government is trying to do. When we see what Steve just showed us, this is destruction on a huge basis that should never happen because there's no science to support it. That's the problem. I'm a scientist. I have particularly noted the negligent lack of research, or diligent risk assessment research in the management of the introduction of renewable wind and solar power stations in Australia. I won't call them farms from now on. They're not. They're nothing like farms, the converse of farms. In particular, research we've done, and it should be shown at the bottom of your screen. I can't quite see the full part of mine. Oh yes, it's in the next one. We've shown in our research, published scientific research in Engineering Journal, that the downwind turbulent landscape drying wakes of wind power stations. I'll show you some evidence that we have for that. So you have, if a wind power station is working well, it will have good, strong, straight winds, laminar flow. But after the turbines, you get turbulent flow of the wind and what we call the wake. And that's very drying. It's bound to be very drying. We also show that heat is produced in the turbine itself. So consequently, we expect to see a drying out of the landscape. Secondly, I've been drawing attention to the toxic solar power stations, particularly the ones that contain silver. Not all wind turbines actually contain silver, but a kilowatt of solar panels will have something like 25 grams of silver making connections. I have shown a diagram here, and if I had more time, I could dwell on that. But that silver makes them very efficient in terms of conducting electricity away from the solar cell to the generator effectively. But if 1% of that silver is leached out during the life of the solar farm, that soil under the solar power station will be lost forever. Silver is a very toxic heavy metal. It's used to control Legionnaire's disease, for example, when water gets contaminated with that organism that is deadly to people. They use silver rather than mercury, but silver is almost, as ions, is almost as toxic as mercury. I'm not going to deal with that in this talk, though. That's one of the issues I've been raising at opposing solar power stations that are being promoted by the government. The infrasound is something, as I mentioned, that I come across through meeting Cheryl, and I really want to congratulate our international speakers tonight. I think they've done an excellent job in bolstering the whole area. Since 2015, I no longer have PhD students, but with colleagues, both in Australia and overseas, in Thailand and Bosnia, we've been trying to fill this gap in due diligence without funding. One of the things is the objection to wind farms. I've got farms there, I'm going to remove it, in vulnerable locations. Potential effects on productivity and bushfire intensity from turbulent heat release in wind farm wakes. This particular picture was taken over the ocean outside Denmark, but the connection underneath here is our paper, which has now already had 22 citations, even though it's only been published just over a year. For example, it works with a much simpler method than what the theory that is being used for most universities, and it works just as well with a Boeing 747 in terms of deflection of wind under the wing or deflection of wind off the blades. I don't have time to go into the details of it, but we can calculate very easily the power that's generated by wind turbines. And we can also, as it turns out, estimate the energy from what's called the back torque, or as the blade courses through the air, the turbine blades reach, particularly on the larger wind turbines, approach the speed of sound, something like half the speed of sound. So they exert huge pressure on the air behind the blade, which is driven by wind torque on the other side. For example, Chinese work shows that you definitely get vertical wind shear and convection downwind of wind farms. And our published research on wind turbines shows turbulent downstream wind may dry out the landscape. I've particularly taken interest in the Western Australia case, where wind farms have been located north of Perth. And And looking at the wind rows for winds in the winter season when it rains, the winds predominantly are towards the area north of Perth. And as a consequence, they've had more bushfires there of greater intensity than they've ever had before. I would really have written to the West Australian government about this, and they suggested I do the research and let them know. But they've gone ahead with their program. Fairly recently, in November 2024, Cervantes was cleared. Everyone had to get out. And look at the fire. This is a case where the wind in the wake slows down and you get convection. And this is typical of what one would expect in that case. The other case I've mentioned, and I've been talking to the government about it in the various inquiries, is the Maui August 2023 fire in Hawaii on the island of Maui. Lahaina had 102 people died, and the only ones that survived there were able to get into the ocean. But why has this happened? Well, this is the main wind farm in Maui, and this is Lahaina. And the predominant winds, shown by the wind rows, are completely in that direction. It was impossible for anyone to get out of this area because all of this area was super dry. And that's the point about the drying out in the landscape. Australia is a hot, dry country, and consequently, we're putting these wind turbines into a hot, dry environment, and it's almost certain that they will deteriorate faster under these much hotter conditions compared to Germany, where it's far cooler. And in Germany, there is some evidence that where the wind turbines are in Germany, the soil is drier than in other areas of that country. So comparing our radial action momentum Newtonian method with the standard method that's taught in universities, our system is much simpler. We have a certain angle by which the wind will bounce off, if you like, because the blades are very elastic at the same angle, and consequently there will be a reverse force rotating the turbine in this direction. And we were able to work out that that would be a function of sine 2 theta, because the wind is no longer progressing in that direction. It's been deflected 2 theta. And through work with my colleague in Bosnia, we spent months working that out. That paper has become very popular, and I predict that in the future it will become the standard method. Here are 2 tables from that paper: the potential for heat release from turbulence, and the second one is predictions regarding heat production and evapotranspiration for 1 or 3 degree changes in temperature in the wake of wind turbines. So we have been putting that to the government. I have restricted, I could talk about a whole lot of other things that I've been raising with the government. It seems I'm one of the few scientists in Australian universities who are actually doing climate science. Everyone else seems to be getting money effectively from the IPCC model, and consequently you can't get money to do the sort of research that we're doing. But a sub part of my talk is predicting unhealthy infrasound generated by wind turbines, an emerging quantifiable environmental risk in the renewable energy zones of New South Wales. From what we've heard tonight, we have a case. We need to press on with it. Considering wind turbines facing the wind direction, they operate at various pitches. If the wind is too strong, they will feather the blades so that the wind flows straight through them Otherwise, they might be blown to bits. And I think in the case of the turbines near where Cheryl lives, which are 63 meters, 62 meters I have in the model, we can actually calculate the power at different angles. Obviously, you get none at 90 and you get none at 0 when the blades directly face the wind. In that case, you're pushing the tower. But the thing to realise is that the tip of the blades, when it descends near the wind turbine tower, is going at an increasing velocity according to the radius. And this is the way our model works. It's a pretty much simpler model than the one that the industry would be using. I have more details here, but you could imagine that the plane of the blade rotation going past the tower, which has a cavity, there will be air jets coming from the turbine, and they will be interacting with the tower cavity and possibly causing infrasound as a secondary resonance. We need more information on this. This is the sort of research that is not being done, and we have a paper prepared almost to send into a journal on this topic. And certainly we'll be using some of the information that we've heard here tonight. This table just shows the power output in megawatts at different wind speeds for the Vesta 126, I think it is. That's the one that is probably the closest to where Cheryl lives. We've also got data for the taller turbines that will be put in to many of the wind power stations. And then looking at the situation, we have here the back torque, and this is the blue one is the top torque. If we multiply that by the angular velocity of the blade, we can work out from the difference of those two how much power is generated. 10 meters, obviously it's much higher, 15 meters higher still. The actual rating for those turbines is usually around about 12 meters per second in between these two. And if we calculate for that, we get pretty much the advertised power output from those turbines. But what we've been able to do is to estimate on the tips of the blade, or all the way down the blade, in fact, from 0 to 63 meters, we can estimate effectively the pressure generated by the blade rotating into the air between it and the wind tower. I've got the back torque there in particular is the one I'm interested in. And if we estimate that in terms of work rate per area, we get these rates of output. And these are in terms of thousands of joules, according to the numbers on the left-hand side here. So what has been interesting is that in doing this, I was aware of Ken Matson's work. And it turns out that our method of calculating power from wind turbines, being much easier to use, lends itself to the, if you like, the radiations in watts per square meter that the turbine will produce at its surface. And looking at that data, the maximum tip watts per square meter are 700, 2800 and 6500 joules per second per square meter. John Hilton has confirmed with me that this is equivalent to 148, 154, and 158 decibels. And just using the standard methods. And we do find that just by taking the extra radius, that would reduce at 1 kilometre to 90 decibels. But from what I've heard from Ken Matson tonight, that estimate is incorrect. Matt said that the infrasound energy propagates further. So we need to do more work on that. But research is needed, but this is consistent with Matson, and particularly, of course, Maria's work is incredible. A colleague, when I sent him this preliminary paper, pointed out that aeroporins in biological membranes control water pressure in organs, like the ears, for example, and hearing. And these are all, they weren't specifically mentioned, but these are proteins in the membranes that allow pressure adjustments to occur. And these occur not only in animals, but in plants. So the question that arises is, what about the aeroporins in other species and plant species? And what effect might these wind turbine power stations have on not only wildlife, but agricultural production? And of course, Ken has already shown you this diagram tonight. More research work is needed. There's a debate going on in Dubbo in the council on Tuesday, where one of the councillors has proposed that Dubbo support renewable energy installations near that town. And I actually sent my submission to the Legislative Council of the New South Wales Parliament opposing renewable energy as very devastating to the agricultural rural production and also to the environment at large. John Hilton, in particular, is doing some work on a sonic impulse sensor. And I'm talking here about a way to estimate the energy in those impulses, depending on which part of the blade we're talking about. If you're talking about the blade near the hub, it's moving very slowly by comparison to the speed at which the back of the blades is moving near the tip. So I don't have too much more to say. I'm very busy. I've got presentations in Perth at the Royal Australian Chemical Institute Congress. One of these is entitled Thermal Calcification. And I think this is what's happening on Earth at the moment. And it's largely responsible for the increase in CO2 in the atmosphere. If I had a beer in my hand and I put some vinegar in it, it would fizz like crazy because you're acidifying it. If you're precipitating calcium carbonate, and that is favoured by warmer water, the hotter it is, the more it precipitates. And that acidifies the water. And that's what's happening. People are observing that, but they've been putting that down to the carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is needed, but it's being absorbed to make the calcium carbonate. And the decrease in the pH then is rising the CO2 level pressure in the atmosphere. So they've got it wrong. The science that the IPCC is using is already from the 1990s. Nearly all of the research centres that have been set up have been stuck with that hypothesis that they promote about carbon dioxide and about the fact that fossil emissions are causing that increase. It's not as simple as that. The Earth is a much more resilient system, and it could be that we're just in a period here for a few years where calcification, that is the precipitation of calcium carbonate, is the Earth adjusting its own climate in response, no doubt, to humans putting a lot more water in the atmosphere with irrigation, and cities also put a lot of water in the atmosphere. So the whole problem is in climate science is that we don't have any certainty. There's no certainty whatsoever in the science that is being pushed. It's a very simple-minded approach that hasn't taken into account the fact that the Earth has existed for billions of years, and so has life on Earth. And it's got far more resilience. That's my prediction. And I'm trying to get other people to do similar research. So my second paper will be on new tools, new ways to do that. Because I'm not bound by the IPCC, and I don't need money either, I just need willing colleagues. I don't have students, therefore I don't have to, I can ask questions that they wouldn't be able to ask because their theses might be failed. So I'm looking forward to Perth in July this year and putting them out, and also doing media work. In a future occasion at the next Australian Meteorological and Oceanographic Society meeting, where I put out similar papers as posters in February this year. In future, I'll be taking into account the wonderful work that we've heard here tonight from Ken and Maria. So my last slide is just to show some of these turbines blighting the rural landscape. That's the approach I'll be using. A nice picture, but just think of the fact that they're changing the climate. Steve pointed out that New South Wales has 9,000 turbines planned. There's some in there now. That means that the whole rural area of New South Wales and Victoria will have a different climate as a result of the wind power stations, of the wind turbines. Because when you work out the amount of air that they're processing when it's windy, they're having a very dramatic effect on the wake many kilometres out. We estimate from evidence from satellites and from aircraft that the turbulent wake effect extends for 30, 40 kilometres. And really, when you look at the distribution that also Steve showed, it's the agricultural region that they're focusing on. We're taking our best agricultural land. I'm shocked to hear there's 450,000 hectares for solar farms. I have done an estimate. I didn't quite get that high. But that means that that soil will never be used again. And the other consequence is that these things shed PFAS and possibly bisphenol because they corrode and they grow. Last week, just as we were making a presentation to the Victorian planning panel for the Hexham development, that very morning, one of these turbines, which had only been up for 5 years, dropped one of its blades, already worn out. This is not the same climate as Germany or Denmark or Sweden, for that matter. We just have not done the research, and I pointed out too to the panel that they could be responsible for class actions at these damages that they're doing to Australians' rural food and fibre, and also the local environment, the wonderful Wimmera, Western Australia. For example, the turbines at Merredin were supposed to power Kalgoorlie. They tried twice, but twice the poles and towers all the way for 330 kilometres to Kalgoorlie have been destroyed in what's called, I grew up in Western Australia, cockeyed bulbs. And I wonder if the wind turbines are not actually contributing to an increasing frequency of such storms. Kalgoorlie is now powered by diesel, and as far as I know, there are no plans to build a third connection. I have written to the Minister for Energy in New South Wales. I have a letter that came back to me later pointing out that, yes, they realise there might be some negative effects of the rollout, but the threat of future climate change means that they don't have to do the research. So it looks as though they're leaving it to people like us, like Cheryl, like Ken, like Maria, and and also Steve. Just forgotten his surname. He's also promoting solar cells which don't contain silver, which are based on copper, which would be far less toxic in the situation. And in his case, he really doesn't care. Steve doesn't want to use agricultural land at all. His plan is to promote solar panels on water bodies, which could also modify the evaporation and save water for agriculture and for something that farmers could run using direct current rather than all of this nonsense about condensers and so on that Steve talked about. So I think at that point I'm going to stop. So how do I turn this off? Stop share. I'll do that. Okay. So I'm not, so my talk really was designed for Cheryl's dilemma. And I'm doing a lot of other work, and I'm getting a few people are now joining me. At the University of Sydney, they don't like what I'm doing because they're getting a lot of money from supporting IPCC research. And they're even talking about putting in a solar farm on Arthursley, which is a farm that was donated, a 10,000 hectare farm that was donated to the university to do research on acid soil. Well, the research on acid soil still needs to be done, but if it's poisoned with silver from Spark Renewables power station, you wonder what the university is up to. And I've written both to the Chancellor and to the Dean of Science suggesting that they do research on this if it's going to go ahead in order to cope with what will happen if there's a major hailstorm, as we heard, I think, from Steve, that ensures that there will be leaching of the heavy metals. And they talk about recycling that won't happen. It's just so far from being economic. People in universities are coming up with some research that shows it can be done. But of course, these things are going to be out there for maybe 15, 20 years when all these other possibilities of contaminating the landscape will occur. So thanks, Cheryl. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Ivan. And I appreciate, Michael appreciates, like everyone in this community appreciate that you, sir, you're retired, you could be off doing something else, but you're out there still trying to help the community. But we have to wind it up, Ivan, because the warning with 5 minutes left because I only booked a certain amount of time to hear. But thank you, sweet. I love you. You're just the most.
Fine. And it's a great pleasure to join you on this. I've never actually participated in a 3-hour symposium like this in the same topic. But,
I really want to thank everyone else, and I know Steve's gone and Professor Matson had to leave. Mariana, thank you so much for staying on and listening to everyone. And I'll be in touch. So thank you all, and thank you from this community.
Cheryl needs some information over.
That's mine.
Just before you all go, I want to thank Cheryl for. Oh, you wait a minute, I was still talking.
I don't know if I'll be still alive, but it will happen. If anyone wants to contact me, do it through Cheryl. Okay.
It's gonna drop out now, Ivan.
Yeah.